3 2 1
ค่ะสวัสดีทุกท่านค่ะดิฉันขอต้อนรับทุกท่านค่ะเข้าสู่การประชุมระดับชาติว่าด้วยธุรกิจกับสิทธิมนุ
Good
ษยช
afternoon,
น
ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the 5th National Dialogue Business and Human Rights Due Diligence. I will walk you through the agenda of this program. At first, there will be an opening plenary by our 5 co-hosts of this programs. After that, there will be the keynote speech by His Excellency Mr. David Daly, Ambassador of the Delegation of European Union to Thailand. And after that, there will be online photo opportunities. The first section will discuss the overview of concept, trends, drivers, and standards of human rights due diligence by Ms. Rachel Davis, Vice President and co-founder of Chief Project. The second section will be the business experience with human rights to receive the representative and resource person from leading Thai companies. And the third session will be Europe's experience with human rights due diligence. We also have been honored to have resource person from European countries as well as other experts. We also have interactive survey with 2 questions. And the fourth session, last and not the least, the presentation on the conclusion and way forward on human rights due diligence in Thailand. Simultaneous interpretation from Thai to English and vice versa will be available. For those of you who join this from laptop, please select the group sign on the lower right-hand corners. And if you are online through mobile phone, please click Add More, click Language Interpretation, and choose your respective language. The presentation will be available from the link in the chat box. If you have any question for our expert and resource person, please type your question at any time at the Q&A. The moderator will bring your question and our Global Compact Network Thailand YouTube channel will rebroadcast this event. And please welcome again to the 5th National Dialogue on Business and Human Rights. This is the 5th time that we have this section, the National Dialogue on the topic of Human Rights Due Diligence or HRDD. Usually, during the past year, we have organized the National Dialogue as an on-site meeting. Today is the first event that we have hosted online with the collaboration of 5 alliances, including the Right and Liberty Protection Department, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the United Nations Development Program of Thailand, Global Compact Network of Thailand, and SME Confederation Thailand. My name is Chuliporn from Human Rights, from Right and Liberty Protection Department will be moderating and emceeing this event. Firstly, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Somsak Thepsutin to give an opening remark on the 5th National Dialogue on Business and Human Rights on Human Rights Due Diligence. His Excellency, the floor is yours. His Excellency Mr. David Daly,
ประธานสภาพันธ์ SME ไทย
Ambassador of the Delegation of European Union to Thailand, the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to Thailand, Global Compact Network of Thailand, the Resident Representative of UNDP Thailand, And distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, business and human rights has been the main focus as one of the driving factors under our human rights national agendas.
แผนปฏิบัติการระดับชาติว่าด้วยธุรกิจกับสิทธิมนุษยชน
Since 2008, business and human rights has been at the forefront agenda, and the Cabinet of Ministers have approved the use of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Thailand, therefore, is the first country in the Asia and Pacific that have implemented so far the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in order to provide a framework and guideline for the national policy in promoting the responsible business as well as the respect for human rights in the business activities. The Ministry of Justice through the Right and Liberty Protection Department have collaborated with the large, medium and small enterprises to implement different activities regarding business and human rights. One of our annual activities is the National Dialogue on Business and Human Rights. Today, this is the fifth national dialogue so far on the human rights due diligence or HRDD in order to emphasize the processes in which the business can adopt an enterprise and operation in every aspect. And for those businesses, in order to reduce as well as address adverse impact from their business activities, as well as reduce the human rights impact from their business activities, as well as addressing the growing business demand for business and human rights. I sincerely hope that today's session will allow participants to have an in-depth and thorough understanding regarding human rights due diligence, as well as hearing lessons learned and success story from business enterprises, as well as success story from countries which have implemented human rights due diligence. Currently, the global trend has shifted toward human rights due diligence as one of the mandatory requirements in the European regions, as well as in the United Nations platform. Therefore, the Thai large, medium, and small enterprises should equip and prepare themselves in order to accommodate the change and the shift toward human rights due diligence. I would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the delegation of the European Union to Thailand, the United Nations Development Program, the Global Complex Network of Thailand, as well as the Thai SME Alliance, in which have hosted this national dialogue for the fifth time, as well as our participants. Hope that you would contribute to mobilize the business as well as the Thai economy with the sincere respect of human rights in order to operate your business in a responsible and sustainable manner. Thank you. Thank you, His Excellency Mr. Somsak Sutin, Minister of Justice. Next, may I invite Kun Julamani Chatsuwan, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to give an opening remark. His Excellency Mr. Somsak Sutin, His Excellency David Daly, Ambassador of the Delegation of the European Union to Thailand, Resident Representative of UNDP Thailand, and the Global Compact Network of Thailand, and the chairperson of the Federation of Thai SME. Today, it is my great pleasure to give an opening remark on the 5th National Dialogue on Business and Human Rights Due Diligence. Today, this is the topic that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have been closely monitored. The Business and Human Rights Thailand is the first country that implemented the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which reflects the consultation for multi-stakeholders to follow the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, or UNGP. And the government and business sector in Thailand have closely worked together in order to implement the National Action Plan. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs would like to be the focal point to connect the Thai stakeholder to the knowledge and resources person from the European Union. We also like to keep our Thai business operator update promptly and without delay so that our Thai businesses can adjust to the changes. In Europe, there is the trend toward implementing the mandatory due diligence, and it is expected that it's going to be one of the international standards in the future. This will have an impact on the Thai businesses. So therefore, we need to understand how human rights due diligence will affect Thailand's businesses and why do we have to actually practice human rights due diligence. In order to answer this question, I would like to read some examples of the international standards which have become the norm for Thai exporting or non-exporting company. For example, the ISO 9000 or the electricity and energy saving, as well as food contamination standards. Following this standard, apart from keeping Thai companies and businesses competitive, Thai people will also be beneficial from the standardized and high quality and safe products and business. Similarly, the human rights due diligence is also another standard. Many countries also have the human rights due diligence and environmental impact assessment requirement throughout their supply chain. Today, we would think that it is unnecessary burdens, but I believe that in the end, due diligence would become normalized and become a business norm in many countries, and many countries will also practice this norm in order to remain competitive, because international companies and large companies will choose to operate with the like-minded company who operate under the same standard. Preparing yourself can make the company suitable to this adaptability, the new standard in the future. The next question, I think interestingly, many of you would know that the Thai, how and when the Thai business can adjust to the due diligence issue. Due diligence is a new standard, and it has not been implemented as a law in the many countries. But if you prepare yourself, you can lead the game rather than being follower. If we take a forward-looking approach, monitor the relevant situation, and excel yourself beyond the norms, you can be leader in the business. This national dialogue can be a platform for exchange among the relevant company, the large company champions, as well as let's learn from the countries in the European Union, and will serve as an important source of guideline and recommendation. We use case study from the EU because European countries have global advance in terms of this human rights due diligence, despite in some country in European country is only on the starting baby step. However, the European Union will implement the mandatory due diligence in Europe and Germany. There are also like mandatory human rights due diligence laws and requirements. We will be hearing from our resource person from European countries. This will enable the Thai business to revise their strategies and also prepare for the calculation of costs and benefit, have shift from securing cheap labor to identifying the business partner who can also practice a sustainable, environmentally friendly operation, as well as traceability and due diligence in their operation. The more Thailand can adjust, our Thai business will be competitive in the global businesses. It will ensure that we can be able to compete and also like respect of human rights and the environment, which can foster the social and economic growth, which can lead to finally sustainable development. Thank you so much.
ค่ะก็ต้องขอขอบพระคุณค่ะท่านรองปลัดกระทรวงการต่างประเทศค่ะ
Thank you so much คุณจุลามณีชาติสุวรรณ
ขอเรียนเชิญดร.
The Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand. Next, I would like to invite Kun Netithorn from the Global Compact Network of Thailand. His Excellency Mr. Somsak Thepsutin, Ministry of Justice, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency David Daly, Delegation of the European Union to Thailand, and the the Federation of Thai SME. Today it is my great honor to host this 5th National Dialogue on Business and Human Rights due diligence. Today I would like to press an important contribution of the Right and Liberty Protection Department, Ministry of Justice, to mobilize the National Action Plan as well as the National Dialogue Human Rights Due Diligence and Business and Human Rights Champions in this event. The Global Compact Network of Thailand is also honored to host this event with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Federation of Thai SME, the European Union, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and UNDP, which are the important partners and stakeholders to mobilize business and human rights into Thailand. Our organization have been beneficial from the UN guiding principle on business and human rights. The CNT would like to commemorate Dr. John Ratchis for drafting the UN Guiding Principle for Business and Human Rights, and I would like to reaffirm the commitment and urge you to carry the torches forward from Professor Ratchis, whether in Thailand or in any countries or any territory in which Thai business have operated during the past 5 years. Thailand have succeeded in raising the awareness for the businesses in terms of the business and human rights and the operation of business and respect human rights. We are now under the second phase for the mobilizing business and human rights in Thailand by implementing the UN guiding principle on business and human rights to ensure that the business can respect human rights. And the Global Compact of Thailand also have organized the training regarding the business and human rights to Thailand. And actually, like we have received the question that our obligation to respect, what entail the obligation to respect, what are the priorities, what are the area, and will this present a risks in the community, and how a business organization can assess and mobilize or prevent the risk. In my organization, many organizations would ask if I will have to implement business and human rights 9 a.m. tomorrow, what should I do? So how can we mobilize the financial resources and also human rights resources? I agree with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that we have to prepare in advance. This is the basic practical problem that we need to prepare the answer and also to communicate to people in our organization. Especially, we would like to mobilize the human rights due diligence in Thailand and also implement it wide and large in the business in Thailand. What are the added value of human rights due diligence, which is an analysis of the human rights impact using a human-centric approach, not only in our business activity, but throughout the supply chain and value chain for a business in order to use this information to identify strategy, policy, and tactic, as well as business plan that can respect human rights. However, When the business entity decided to commit or conduct human rights due diligence, it had to start from the recognition of value of the respect of human rights systematically within their own organization. Next is to raise the awareness of the importance of the human rights due diligence that we can, and if they are committed, we have to give them guiding step to start. We need to prepare the easy to access and easy to understand information. And during the pandemic, the business have faced a lot of challenges during the pandemic. So how can we collaborate in order to ensure that every size of business and every sector of business can also implement them? Ladies and gentlemen, when we study the law and regulation globally, human rights is one of an important issue for the stakeholders, whether they will decide to engage in the business, whether investor, customer, or our staff. Thus, it will force the business to perform mandatory human rights diligence, and inevitably, the Deputy Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs have raised this issue, especially in the at-risk business, and if they export their products to other countries we have like higher human rights standard, this can present as a business risk, in which I agree with the Ministry of Justice. I also want to promote level playing field in order that business can raise to the top in international fora, as well as the business relationship between international trade partner. We have to ensure the implementation of like equal respect of human rights in the destination country or in any country that Thailand have foreign direct investment, in order to give the motivation and incentive for the business sector. Partner also have to reaffirm that they will continue to support the business after improving the human rights standard, despite the price will be increased from such activity. Increasing the competency in the Thai business and competitiveness in Thailand would be important. For example, organizing manual online classes and training activities, which can be easily accessed by different business organizations, as well as providing incentive for the Thai business organization on human rights due diligence. For example, tax incentive, as well as the roster of preferential list of suppliers, as well as promoting the business champion, as well as lessons learned and exchanges. Increasingly, we can also prepare the assessment indicator, as well as reporting, to promote transparency, measurability, and accountability, and to allow the compensation from one business organization with their peers. The Global Compact Network of Thailand would like to support the activities and also contribute. I hope that my organization can exchange with our resource person and expert from Thailand and internationally, from chief, from other like leading companies, as well as from the European Union, as well as other person. The Global Compact Network of Thailand would like to thank all the stakeholders, and we would like to accompany you in order to drive the business and human rights for concrete results, ensure the respect of human rights among the Thai business to Thailand. Thank you and สวัสดีครับ
ก็ต้องขอบคุณนะคะท่านดร.เนติธรประดิษฐ์สารค่ะรองเลขาธิการสมาคม
Thank you, Dr. Netithorn Padissan, from the Vice President of the Global Compact Network. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Reno Meyers from the UNDP Thailand.
Thank you, Kunchirapan, and Savadikap, everyone. Reno Meyer from UNDP. A great pleasure to join you all for this afternoon's session of this national dialogue on business and human rights. I'm just keeping a little bit, giving a little bit time for people to switch to English, because unfortunately I do not speak Thai, so people who do not speak English will have to switch to translation. Very good. His Excellency Minister Tepsutin, Minister of Justice, Excellency David Davey, the head of delegation of the European Union here in Thailand, Kun Chulamani, the Deputy Secretary, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kud Mao from the Global Compact, and Kun Sangchai from the Thai Federation of SMEs. Wonderful to join you for the opening of this fifth national dialogue on business and human rights. It is a privilege and an honor for UNDP to be a co-organizer with all of you of this important event, an annual event, the third that we are participating in. And of course, I'd like to thank the EU for the support that they're bringing to UNDP to work in this area, support without which it would be difficult for us to do as much. The event last year was dedicated to nobody's surprise to COVID-19, and I'm sure by now we would all have hoped that we would have been able to move on and leave COVID-19 behind us. Unfortunately, as we all know, it is far from being a reality, and the dramatic impact of this pandemic continues to affect the economy, the society at large, so many households, not only from a health perspective, but also from a loss of income, rising poverty levels again in Thailand and countries around the world. So we continue to see, you know, a lot of disturbance and a lot of challenges affecting everyone. I'm saying this because I think it is also an opportunity for us to look at this pandemic on the other side of the coin, meaning, you know, what opportunities, what lessons we absolutely have to extract from this. And two important ones I see that relate to the topic of this year's dialogue on human rights due diligence. One is, I think it clearly, we see clearly a really increased awareness by the CEOs and leaders in the economy, in the business sector, in companies, that you know, CSR may have been an option for some of them. Today, reflecting on how they impact society, how they impact development, and how they how the work of their company impacts the ecosystem is not an option anymore if they wish to inscribe themselves in a sustainable way, if they want to continue, you know, contributing to the economy. I think there's a clear understanding today that the whole rights agenda, and I'm talking here more than just the political and social and economic rights. I'm also talking about the rights to a safe environment, a right to you know, a clean water and accessing renewable energy. So the broader definition of rights is something that has to be fully integrated in the vision and the strategy, and of course in the practices of the private sector. So that's one, I think, big lesson, which allows us, and this is where the human rights due diligence comes in, to move from, you know, what has to happen and move to how it has to happen, right? And I'll come back to this. The second big lesson I think that we are seeing is that it's not only an acknowledgement of the importance of this reflection of the impact of companies on the ecosystem, but it's also becoming a requirement because consumers today, citizens at large, you know, realize and are learning the hard way that every single individual, you know, impacts one way or another this ecosystem and the relationship between humans and nature. And therefore, the demand for cleaner practices, you know, more fair, more just societies, more also voice and space for citizens to contribute, to participate, you know, is increasing. And there is therefore this, you know, convergence of all citizens asking the questions, not wanting to just, you know, consume, buy, purchase, supply, irrespective of the quality, but ask questions. Where is this from? Has the, you know, is this according to standards? Has this been produced according to labor rights, to decent work, etc., etc.? There is clearly an increased awareness and an increased level of demand from the consumers and the citizens on the part in their consumption patterns, right? Which increases, therefore, this obligation for producers, to really fully respect and fully mainstream a rights agenda in their companies. So on both sides, the supply and the demand, I really see that this COVID-19 pandemic will have accelerated in a way the need to respect and to understand the importance that Khun Mao was just reminding us about, of really fully aligning the private sector with a rights agenda and a compliance to the principles. Now, the National Action Plan, of course, is an amazing tool, but it will not be sufficient. It's really, I would even say it has to go all the way into the mindset, right, of the stakeholders that are so critical in the in the implementation of a business and human rights guiding principles. Now, a lot has been done, and I think Thailand is clearly a trailblazer in the region and beyond, and a lot of progress has been achieved in the past few years, but there is clearly more to be done. In 2019, UNDP had conducted a study on mapping private sector engagement in human rights. At the time, only 12% of the Thai-listed companies were conducting human rights due diligence, and less than 3% were making explicit references to the UN guiding principles on human rights in their annual reports. Now, this is clearly going to increase, but a third, and this is very important, and it links to how happy we are that the Federation of Thai SMEs is joining us, is because we were seeing that among those who were reporting, taking action on human rights, most of them were large companies, right? Large companies, a lot of them, we find them in the Global Compact Network. So it highlights the importance of the Thailand Global Compact Network to promote this. But we also know that the economy of Thailand, 90% is SMEs, right? So it's absolutely critical that we find the right approach to, bring this message, bring this advocacy, and bring the support tailored to how the SME can absorb it and really make it theirs, right? So it's not about force feeding it, to an SME. It's really adapting the message and adapting the tools, to small and medium enterprises who, as we know, have more challenges, are more vulnerable on the first part, but also have less capacity and maybe even less exposure and experience, to issues that we have been discussing, for many years at the level of Bangkok. So here I'd like to really offer UNDP's assistance in tailoring those tools around the human rights due diligence, to ensuring that they, of course, cater, to the broad business sector and private sector of Thailand, but that we need to make an effort at tailoring the offer to those who we are targeting. And I think today we need to target those SMEs, and we will need to be guided, by the Federation and by other stakeholders who have a much better understanding and knowledge of those capacities, the existing capacities, and help us sharpen those capacities so that the guiding principles become reality, not only of those who can, I would say, afford, doing it, which are the large companies, but those where it really matters if we want to rally the large majority of the economic actors in the context of Thailand, which are the SMEs, and they are all over the country, right? And this is the second, I think, value that UNDP can bring, with the guidance of both the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and NESDC, the National Economic and Social Development Council. We are really focusing in the coming years on the localization of the SDGs, bringing the whole Agenda 2030, also a rights-based agenda, to the local communities, to the subnational level, to the provinces, to the municipalities. And there, the Thai SMEs, will be instrumental, not only in contributing to the achievement of the goals, but also, of course, to also adhere to the principles and the guiding principles on business and human rights. So, a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm really, really pleased to see the Federation joining this national dialogue. The importance of the tool, the HRDD, the human rights due diligence, as a how-to to respond to the growing appetite of all the sector of the business in Thailand at ensuring that they align not only their strategic vision, but also their day-to-day practices and that of their supply chains, to the guiding principles on business and human rights. So a big thank you to all the stakeholders and to the European Union to really pushing this agenda forward. We are extremely committed in UNDP to continuing this work, to bringing this work to the next level, which is the level at subnational level, where I believe we need to root this whole approach within the communities, within the small and medium-sized enterprises. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion this afternoon. Kapung ka.
Thank you, Mr. Ronald Mayer. และในลำดับต่อไปค่ะดิฉันขอเรียนเชิญคุณแสงชัยธีรกุลวานิชค่ะประธานสมาพันธ์ SME ไทยกล่าวเปิดการประชุมในลำดับสุดท้ายค่ะ
Thai Federation of SME to give an opening remark. Distinguished yes, His Excellency สมศักดิ์เทพสุทิน Ministry of Justice คุณจุลามณี Deputy Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs Dr. เนติธร ปฏิสาร Vice President of the Global Compact Network of Thailand คุณ Ronald Mayer from the UNDP and His Excellency David Daly, the Ambassador of the Delegation of the Delegation of European Union to Thailand. At first, I would like to thank for your extended invitation, and it has been a great honor to invite the Federation of Thai SME to attend the 5th National Dialogue of Business and Human Rights. The Federation of Thai SME is one of the sectors that is important to mobilizing the national economy with our business partner, with stakeholders, and with the society in order to improve and contribute to the Thai society. Thanks to Kun Ronald Mayer, who recognized the contribution of the small and medium enterprises and their roles in pushing the issue of business and human rights in terms of their business to respect human rights and liberties in every level, and also recognize human rights and human dignities as well as equalities. Additionally, we have also intend to for SME, which is like a small and medium enterprise, to contribute to peace and equality and harmony in the society. We are small in sizes, but we are large in number. We contribute to 90% of businesses and also employ about 70% of workers in the formal sector in Thailand. With this contribution from SME GDP contribution to Thailand only contribute to 34% of the national GDP. SME export only about 13% out of the overall export value to Thailand, which is tiny contribution comparing to other countries in which SME especially developed country in which SME can play more contribution to the business. SME should be recognized as an important economic engine. It should not be left as the strategic plan or policy, but it should be implemented with relevant stakeholders to provide concrete results. There should be assessment, revision, and ongoing development to ensure SME collaboration and contribution. We can also promote the respect of human rights and human dignity from workplace, family, and education instilled to ensure that the world is the better place for every life. Trade sanction, red tapes, bureaucratic hurdles and obstacles, discrimination, human rights violation has to end. We need to implement the UN guiding principle on 10 dimensions to promote HME operator to recognize the added values from implementing business and human rights due diligence. We should promote the human rights policy in the business, prevention of human rights violation, assessment, monitoring and evaluation, and human rights education within the business enterprise, and also throughout our relevant supply and value chains, and also the delegation of specific human rights officer, and also formal grievance channels, as well as providing redresses and effective communication channel. Last and not the least, everybody have to follow the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights on the first phase. The Federation of Thai SME is extremely pleased to create the ecosystem that respect human rights and liberty with the Right and Liberty Protection Department, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Global Compact Network of Thailand, as well as the UNDP in Thailand, as well as the stakeholders to promote proper and better understanding regarding the relevant important topic and agendas, and also showcase as well as highlight best practices among the SME and recognize our SME champions in order to ensure our resiliencies, reduce social and economic inequality, and promote sustainability. The Federation of Thai SME want to promote aware SME that respect human rights according to international human rights standards for creativity, justice, and sustainability and harmonies in Thailand. Thank you so much. สวัสดีครับ Thank you คุณแสงชัย for your opening speech, and I would like to invite His Excellency David Jali, the ambassador of the delegation of European Union to Thailand.
Mr. Somsak Thepsutin, Minister of Justice, Your Excellency Madam Chulamani Chartsuwan, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Netitorn Praditsarn, Deputy Secretary General of the Global Compact Network, Thailand, Mr. Renaud Meyer, Resident Representative of the UNDP, Mr. Sangchai Thirakulwanich, Chairman of the Federation of Thai SMEs, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. I would like to start by speaking about human rights diligence. It is here to stay. It has an inevitability about it. There is not one single day without reading in the local and international press about sustainability, both in its environmental and social dimensions. The trend has been magnified by the pandemic. This is a societal choice reflecting the expectations of citizens and consumers, including in major marketplaces like the EU and other developed economies, but also closer to us in Thailand and in the broader Asian region. Integrating human rights due diligence into business operations and undertaking human rights due diligence across the supply chains have therefore become a matter of catching up with this trend and hence staying competitive. In today's and tomorrow's interconnected world, in a post-COVID era, human rights due diligence is an inevitable way forward for businesses and the economy in order to survive and, more importantly, to bloom. It is being demanded by the European marketplace, by our consumers, and also by law. It is here to stay. I want to turn to Thailand's contribution to business and human rights, and I want to commend Thailand for what it's doing. Engaging on this path, responsibility lies not only with the private sector, it also lies with governments, which should lead by example. Increased efforts by the authorities would send a strong signal to the private sector. In this regard, I would like to commend Thailand for taking the lead by becoming the first country in Southeast Asia to adopt a standalone national action plan on business and human rights in 2019. The National Action Plan, with its short and long-term actions, can guide government and private sector in their next steps during the pandemic and in the recovery. Besides the National Action Plan, I would like to highlight Thailand's key initiatives to achieve progress in the field of business and human rights, of which its participation in the EU-funded Business and Human Rights in Asia project is a very telling example in the context of today's event. The growing private sector-led UN Global Compact Network Thailand should also be mentioned, as well as a series of important legislative measures by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Thailand, which will lead to imposing on Thai-listed companies a mandatory reporting on their environment, social and governance performance. Efforts in the area of business and human rights should be inclusive and cater also for the needs of smaller-sized companies. It would be fundamental that the government offers them support to transition towards a sustainable society and economy through concrete acts so that SMEs and bigger companies can operate on a level playing field, avoiding a race to the bottom, sacrificing sustainability principles and labor standards in order to stay competitive. The choice made by Thailand to engage in favor of sustainability gives the kingdom a leading role in the region and a competitive edge that should be maintained and pursued. This move certainly fits into the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, adopted in October 2021, earlier this year. This strategy clearly underlines the EU's objective to create a critical mass of countries supporting environmental, human and labor rights, due diligence and best practices. In this regard, Thailand could be a critical partner to the EU and play an important role in the region, including in view of its presidency of APEC next year. I understand this regional ambition in the field of business and human rights has been and remains high in Thailand's political agenda. There is more we can do together. In order to turn this ambition into a more concrete and forward-looking set of actions, effective implementation of the National Action Plan is obviously essential. While in the EU, binding requirements on responsible business conduct have been established in sectoral legislation, for example, in the areas of timber or conflict minerals, and voluntary due diligence is promoted across value chains, the EU is stepping up its commitments by preparing mandatory due diligence initiatives at the EU level. Mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence is expected to cover companies' activities throughout their supply chain, leading to the placing of their products on the EU market. From a trade perspective, it is important to ensure that the future obligation is transparent, non-discriminatory, and based on international guidelines, principles, and standards. On the latter, the principles embedded, for example, in the ILO core conventions, including the ILO Convention 87 on freedom of association and Convention 98 on collective bargaining, these will greatly matter. A ratification and implementation of all ILO core conventions by Thailand will help the country to be better prepared for this upcoming trend towards mandatory due diligence in global trade. The negotiation of an ambitious and forward-looking FTA with the European Union would be an effective motor for such reforms, thereby helping Thailand to avoid falling into the middle-income trap. As illustrated in the EU strategy on the Indo-Pacific, Thailand can count on EU concrete and continued support and partnership to move forward together on the path of sustainability and inclusive prosperity. The Business and Human Rights in Asia project, which is supporting today's event, as well as other similar projects on labour rights and sustainable natural resource management, benefiting both the government and the private sector in Thailand, these are examples of our support on which we are keen to build further. I wish you a very insightful and constructive exchange. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you His Excellency ค่ะ และช่วงต่อไปค่ะดิฉันขออนุญาตเรียนเชิญท่านผู้บริหารจากองค์กรร่วมจัดทั้ง5องค์กรค่ะและท่านวิทยากรทุกท่านนะคะร่วมเปิดกล้องค่ะเพื่อที่ทางทีมงานนะคะ
Now we will have electronic photo opportunities for our co-host
ดิฉันขออนุญาตให้สัญญาณนะคะ
and allow me to count 1, 2, 3.
ขออนุญาตอีกครั้งค่ะ
One again, 1, 2, 3. Thank you for your participation in photo opportunities, and I think we have already do the electronic photo opportunity. And I would like to thank the leadership and executive from our co-host. Next, I would like to begin the first session. The first session would be the overview of concept, trend, driver, and standard for human rights due diligence. This session is honored to have Ms. Rachel Davis, Vice President of co-founder and co-founder of SHIP Project.
Thank you very much to the hosts, all of the co-organizers, particularly to the Government of Thailand for the invitation to be with you, and also to the Global Compact Network Thailand, because we have had several years of very good partnership between my organization, SHIFT, and the Global Compact Network. For those of you who don't know us, SHIFT is a non-profit organization, and our mission is to advance the implementation of the guiding principles. My own background is very closely connected to the UN guiding principles. I was a senior legal advisor to the late Professor John Ruggie during his UN mandate, and as you heard, I'm a co-founder of SHIFT. I'd like to share my screen with you. The organizers kindly said that I could use a few slides, and these will also be shared with all of the participants after the event, because I want to walk you through a few of the core concepts around human rights due diligence that are central to understand as we look ahead to the trend that is happening, particularly, not only, but particularly in Europe, as you've heard from the comments already. And what I would like to highlight is really the importance, when we look at core concepts in the guiding principles, of the way in which human rights due diligence, the focus for today, has to be embedded in the governance systems, and indeed eventually in the culture of an organization, if it's to have the right results. Quite often we see a focus on the things that are perhaps easier to measure. So does a company have a policy commitment? Does it have a grievance mechanism? And we can measure those things. We can say yes or no, and maybe we can start to think about the quality of them. But the focus of the blueprint that the guiding principles give us for helping companies and expecting companies to respect human rights is human rights due diligence. And that's an ongoing process, as many of you who are on the call today with us know very well. And indeed, many of you are implementing this already in your companies. It involves really maintaining that clear focus, as you see at the center of this diagram, that the purpose of human rights due diligence, the primary purpose, is to prevent harm to people. As we've heard, it can have many business benefits as well, and soon it's going to have a very clear business benefit in terms of access to global value chains that connect to the European market. But already it's important in the French market, the German market, because of the laws there, as you will hear from subsequent speakers. But it's really maintaining that focus on the purpose of due diligence and constantly checking whether you as a business are meeting that focus in practice through engagement with stakeholders, with those who may be impacted by your business or by the activities of your business partners, or if you can't engage with them directly, then with those who have good insight into their perspectives instead. And when we think about what this risk assessment process looks like for human rights risks, what is really different for many companies using a risk matrix will be very familiar for managing other aspects of business operations, financial. But when we look or think about a human rights risk heat map instead, we're really doing something different when we analyze the severity part of this framework. We're bringing in and trying to understand those perspectives of affected stakeholders. So in the Thai context, we particularly want to think about workers who could be more vulnerable to impacts. That could be workers who are not represented by a trade union. It could be workers in SEZs, special economic zones. It could be workers who are paid for output or on a piece rate basis. So that happens frequently in agriculture and textile contexts. But it could also be migrant workers, of course. But it could be workers outside Thailand as well. It could be workers that are in the supply chain of Thai businesses. So, for example, workers that are involved in manufacturing the ingredients for solar panels, which are essential in a number of significant renewable energy projects in Thailand and in construction in Thailand. It could be workers who are involved in brick or stone manufacture or in mineral extraction, again, in other countries that feed into Thai business sectors. And I think this focus on who is vulnerable, and that no matter what sector of the economy we're in, and that's just as true in the country where I am, in Australia, every sector has human rights risks, and there are vulnerable workers or communities in every sector. And I think that the publication that was just launched earlier this week by the Stock Exchange of Thailand, I know Dr. Suri will speak later in today's program, by Walk Free and by the global initiative FAST, which looks at modern slavery risks and provides guidance for Thai business on modern slavery risks, is very good in showing that this is not just about one sector. Perhaps there has been a lot of discussion about certain sectors, but it's a shared challenge, and we all need to be looking for these most vulnerable stakeholders and most severe risks, and then prioritizing them as a business in a heat map the way we would for other types of business risks, but maintaining that focus on risk to stakeholders. What else is different about human rights due diligence? Well, again, the guiding principles and the OECD guidelines as well give us some very clear expectations for how business needs to tailor its actions depending on how it is connected to risks or to impacts. I'm not going to go through this summary slide in detail. As I said, it will be shared with everyone afterwards. But this is really, if you like, a snapshot or a cheat sheet for what the guiding principles expect in terms of action. And one of the core expectations is for businesses to use and to build leverage. And by that, we mean their ability to influence another party, because often these problems are not just caused by one company or actor alone. They can be quite complex problems, and they require collaboration in new, maybe different ways between business partners, between businesses and other stakeholders as well. And so you see in the guiding principles, and you see increasingly in the new legal expectations that I will talk about shortly, that the role of leverage with business partners is very important. And there are a number of different forms of leverage in the guiding principles, and that we see companies using very actively in practice. If we start at the bottom and we think about more classic commercial leverage, so what can you do in the contract itself? What kinds of terms can you set to encourage your partner to meet these standards? Can you give them any incentives? Is that possible? Increasingly, it's unreasonable, really, for companies to expect their partners, for buying companies to expect suppliers to meet certain standards without any recognition at all for the hard work that goes into that. So maybe there are commercial forms of leverage that are possible, but maybe there are also forms, and these are just as important, forms of leverage that go beyond commercial. So offering training, support, capacity building, other kinds of advice, helping a business partner avoid the mistakes that that maybe we made as a company. Let's share that learning so that people don't have to go through the same experience. They can jump ahead and improve their processes because of the experience we've had, for example. But there are other more nuanced or complicated in a way in terms of getting engaged with other actors, forms of leverage that are possible too. Collaborating with peers, that can be through quite straightforward approaches. The UN Global Compact already is bringing peer companies together for some of that learning. But this is about forms of collaboration that are really targeted at addressing a specific problem. And if we think about leverage with peers, leverage with other actors like NGOs or like trade unions or like international organizations like the ILO, for example, or UNDP, who's with us today, then we see those kinds of collaborative efforts already happening, for example, around the Thai seafood sector. That's taken a lot of different actors getting involved to try to drive real change. So there's already experience with more creative forms of leverage beyond the individual business relationship in Thailand that hopefully can be further built on. I'm conscious of time and I'm summarizing 30 minutes in 15 minutes. So let me move actually to a question that I know many in the audience may have today, which is, but what about SMEs? And we hear this question a lot. It's obviously very important in Thailand, but many other economies as well. SMEs make up to 90% of the economy. And so we always need to be thinking about SMEs. And we did when we were working on the guiding principles. And at Shift, we've worked with a number of SMEs over the last few years on their approaches. And I wanted to highlight just a few quick lessons. First, it may certainly be true that SMEs have less commercial leverage, as I was talking about. They may only represent 5% of supply to a particular buyer, for example. But they can still have relationship leverage, that leverage that is beyond commercial, as I was talking about. And we've seen SMEs personally engage both with their own suppliers or with their shareholders or with the buying companies that they provide goods to explain why human rights due diligence is important to them, what they are trying to do, and to seek cooperation from their partners in those efforts. And we've seen that that can be very effective. We've worked directly with SMEs in the apparel, food, retail, and cleaning sectors, for example, that focused on the issue of low wages, either for their own workforce or for their suppliers. And because they knew and they made the argument to their partners and to their shareholders that if they focused on raising low wages, yes, there may be some short-term business costs to that, but there would be many human rights benefits for the workers involved. And so it's a really good example of picking one issue that can have many other benefits and just focusing on that in order to make change. And that, I think, really reflects the spirit of the UN Guiding Principles. And the point that I was making at the beginning, which is this is not about saying to SMEs, you know, we're just going to tick off whether you have a policy and whether you have this and whether you have that, because then what are we really changing? We're creating some more administrative things to do, but we're not necessarily getting to better outcomes for workers. If we focus on a topic like wages and really making a change there, we're more likely to drive better outcomes. So we would say that human rights due diligence is not more or less difficult for SMEs. It's just difficult in different ways. I want to come quickly to the EU level, because obviously that is inspiring our discussion today. And some of you may be aware there are many different moving pieces. I'm not going to go into them in depth, but probably the most important for you to be aware of is the Sustainable Corporate Governance Initiative, which I'm sure you'll hear more about. The proposal is not yet through at the EU level, but we expect it early next year. And it will have two components to it, a new corporate duty to do due diligence and possibly reform of directors' duties. These are both being debated. At the same time, the EU is revising its corporate sustainability reporting directive, and there are going to be new EU sustainability reporting standards and a body that oversees them. This also is focused on the integration of human rights due diligence from the guiding principles. But there are lots of other initiatives too. You may be aware there's a regulation about batteries. There's a regulation now about deforestation that goes beyond the existing timber directive. There's also a sustainable products initiative focused on labeling and the consumer-facing side of this. And finally, the President of the Commission has said or raised the possibility of an import ban on goods involving severe human rights harms. And in all of these initiatives, human rights due diligence has a role to play in the legislative expectations. And that means that when we think about how this is all going to be implemented and integrated at EU level, what is going to be really important is to see a smart mix of policy measures that support these new forms of regulation. It's going to be important for EU companies and workers and communities in the EU, but it's also going to be important for Thai and other companies supplying into the EU market and for workers in Thailand and beyond. And so I think we still want to see more of this discussion at EU level. What will be the supporting measures that sit around these new forms of regulation in order to ensure that we are not just imposing new legal duties, which are important and it's time for them. Also, as you've heard, I think there's a clear consensus in that regard, but that they are having the results we want them to have for workers and communities globally. That's very important. So I'd just like to conclude, because I'm conscious of time, by saying what do we think are some of the most important points that you might want to keep in mind as we look ahead to these EU developments. First, that human rights due diligence is central to new and potential regulation. And so aligning with the UN guiding principles can give companies confidence that you and they can meet these new expectations. The different pieces of regulation may say slightly different things. They may have slightly different focus areas, but there is a core that needs to be and should be consistent, and that is the guiding principles expectations. So getting human rights governance and management systems in place now can put companies ahead of this trend. That's clear. The third point is that it is going to be important, and I think we still have a challenge ahead of us, to ensure that EU legislation focuses on outcomes for people and that it doesn't incentivize what nobody wants to have happen, which would be cut and run behavior. And for that to happen, we need that mix of policy measures that I was just talking about to drive this. And that's why I think we increasingly see EU governments and hopefully also we'll see the EU Commission focus on what does that mix need to look like to make sure this has the right results. And finally, we're definitely seeing continued attention to modern slavery risks, but we're seeing growing attention, and I think that's important for this audience, to addressing the human impacts of sustainable production and circular economy initiatives. So whether that comes around waste picking or around recycled packaging, there are a range of human rights impacts that connect to these forms of new sustainable production, consumption, and recycling that we need to think about. And the final point I will leave you with is, I mentioned wages before, and I think the increasing focus on the importance of a living wage and how that can transform human rights outcomes for workers at every point in the supply chain and for their families and communities is only going to get more attention. So those are some of the thoughts I would leave you with, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. ก็จบไปแล้วนะคะสำหรับในช่วงที่1ค่ะเราก็ได้
Thank you. And this is the first session we have discussed about the importance of UNGP principle, and the business should have the policies as well as human rights policy, grievance mechanism, and HRDD implementation. In the HRDD implementation, we should focus on engaging relevant stakeholders as much as possible to ensure that the project that the business is focusing or working on does not have negative human rights impact or negative human rights consequences. HRDD is important and it cannot only be implemented by large business. However, SME can also implement human rights due diligence throughout the supply chain and with their business partner as well. Thank you so much for the first session. And next, we will be discussing business experiences with human rights due diligence. We have been honored to have Kun Poom Sirapaphasiri, Assistant Vice President for Global Partnership for Sustainability and Communication from Jalal Pokapan, to be the moderators. Kun Poom, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and good morning to all of our friends, our guests in Thailand and in our international audience. We are in the second session or the first panel discussion talking about business experience with human rights due diligence or HRDD. Now this topic of HRDD has been in discussion in Thailand for quite some time during the past several years. But admittedly, apart from some large corporations or smaller ones that are part of the value chains of large international companies, multinationals, human rights due diligence still remains an area that is still not yet widely understood or implemented. So today we are fortunate to hear from directly from our three experts, those who are directly involved in the process. We have three speakers, Kun Supawadi Chotikayan from Mars Pet Care, Mr. Jan Bis from Nestle, and Kun Nusara Jankeo from Unilever. My name is Poom Sirapaphasiri from CP Group and member of the Global Compact Network Thailand's environmental working team. It's a pleasure to be moderating this panel today. Now, I would like to invite the audience to submit questions to the Q&A box in the Zoom system, and our team will help bring some of those questions for me to ask directly to our panelists, or if any of the panelists would like to respond directly, typing in the answers, that would be great as well. Thank you. So starting off, I would like to invite all three speakers to take just 1 minute or two to introduce themselves and their organization, starting with Kun Supawadi, then Mr. Wis, then Kun Nusra. Kun Supawadi, chen kap.
Yes, thank you very much, Kun Poom. First of all, let me also thank the UN Global Compact Thailand for inviting me to be part of today's dialogue. I'm very excited to be part of this panel and to be sharing our experiences on how we address increased risks and vulnerabilities of our workers in our supply chain, especially during COVID times. But before doing so, let me first introduce myself. I'm currently now working for Mars as Global Sustainable Senior Manager for Human Rights and Marine Biodiversity. I also previously worked with the International Labour Organization and also with the European Union delegation in Thailand itself. Maybe a little bit about Mars Pet Care is we're actually part of a bigger Mars Incorporation in the US-based family-owned business that has been operating for over 100 years already. And we've been making products and a variety of services for both people and pet care. Now we are, in terms of particular pet care, our portfolio includes over 50 brands that we serve over 400 million pets worldwide. Particularly for Thailand, Thailand is considered as a strategic geographical hub for Mars. We currently have 2 manufacturing sites here in Thailand. And in terms of our sourcing, we also source a majority of fish out of Thailand, which fish is a key priority for us because it represents a key ingredient for our pet care products. I'll leave it that, but thank you.
Thank you, Kap. Kun Supawadi, Kap. Next, Kun Jan, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and for having me today with you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jan Vis. I'm in charge of social impact for the company at the group level. It does include human rights, among other topics. I've been with Nestle for 10 years now. doing this. I started really like the human rights due diligence program of the company 10 years ago. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Before Nestle, I was working for IFC, so the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group based in Washington, DC. Also like advising IFC clients in different sectors on human rights related issues. Before that, I worked just 1 year for Professor John Ruggie on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And I started my career at the Swiss Foreign Ministry when I still wanted to become a diplomat before I decided to do something else. So thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you ครับคุณยานครับคุณนุชราครับเชิญครับ
Thank you ค่ะ Firstly, thank you everyone for having me.
Are you still on mute or your microphone is not working?
Is it clear now? Still not working?
I'll try again, please.
Hello? You hear me? Okay. I couldn't hear Kun Pum because Kun Pum is on mute, but you guys can hear me, right? Okay.
Yes, please go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for having me today. I am Nusrat. I am the Regional Procurement Director for Unilever. I have been in procurement and supply chain role for all along my career, and Mars is one of them as well. And my personal passion is on sustainability, diversity, and inclusiveness, and that's why it's also my own personal passion to join the discussion today, because again, only acting alone will not be better than acting together. A bit about Unilever. Unilever is a global company with the presence in more than 190 countries worldwide. We have more than 400 brands worldwide as well. In Thailand, we strongly believe that Thai people will use our products 3 times a day at least. And that's how we think that as a global brands, global company, we impact a lot along the value chain end to end. And we play a very important role in order to drive sustainability, human rights, and everything. And I'm here to talk about it a bit more and open to any Q&A as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Krab Kun Nusra Krab. And for the first question, which is for all 3 of you, could you share your company's experience in conducting HRDD, focusing on your Thai operations and value chain? But of course, if you can bring your international experience to bear in your international operations, if applicable. So what's the motivation? How did you start? How did you prepare the process? To 6 to 7 minutes each, please. So starting with you, Kun Yan, I understand that you also have a slide presentation. You can share it now. Thank you.
Sorry, with me? Am I starting?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Sorry, I apologize.
Yes, please.
All right, very good. Yes, thank you very much. So I put together a few slides because I thought it would be like easier for me to just like make my points. But basically, I'm coming today in to you with 4 key messages. And I think it builds nicely with what Rachel Davis was saying before. The first message is don't wait for legislations to get started. And this is very important. I think Rachel made the point that the UNGPs already capture and reflect most of the things that are being discussed right now in Europe or in US or in other countries when it comes to legislations. My main message is if you do implement the UNGPs, you'll be like in a very good shape actually to meet also like regulatory requirements. And this is important, at least this is our experience. The second message is that there is no silver bullet. So there is a lot of like guidance out there from the Global Compact, from the ILO, from SHIFT, from other organizations. And they are really great tools, of course, for companies to get started. But it's very important that you also like find a way to tailor your human rights due diligence approach is structured and the way that it operates. So tailoring actually these guidance tools or even the UN guiding principle to your own company, the way that it works is very, very important. The third message is human rights can be like a standalone issue, like within the company. You need to find a way to integrate human rights to what you do, like otherwise, either like to the overall sustainability agenda, to the compliance agenda, to specific issues like climate change or water or waste management, what have you, depending on what you do as a company. But this integration process is very, very important because in my experience, it's the only way to really like have the backup from the top management that you need to really develop this program and then implement it, and also like to make it sustainable over the long term. And finally, yeah, be bold. Transparency is important. So for us, reporting on both really like progress, achievements, but also like on the challenges that we have faced along the way has been very important. So we can really like explain what we have tried to do, but also explain why we have failed, because it's a very complex area. It's just like impossible to have it right from the beginning. You will need to test different things, find the right way to do them. And it comes with, of course, success, but also sometimes with failures. And I think having the courage actually to also like report, or at least explain these failures and why companies face them is important. Also like to raise awareness from governments, from NGOs, from UN agencies on the challenges that we face as companies, because there are many. So I'm glad to be here with you today because last week we released our new human rights framework and roadmap. It builds on 10 years of experience carrying out human rights due diligence on the ground, so it doesn't come from nowhere. We used to have what we call the human rights due diligence program, but based on the learnings, based on the experience that we have gathered in the last years, in the last decades, we're now coming up with a new human rights framework and roadmap, and I'll talk about it like in a moment. But it's great for me also like to see like how it works in the Thai context, and with you in particular, whether you think this is something that could potentially also like work in the local context where you operate. I wanted to start by giving you a sense of like what is the scope for us as Nestlé of our due diligence, of our human rights due diligence. And really like it spans across our entire value chain. So it's not only like about our operations, or not only like about the upstream supply chain or distribution activities, it's about everything. And it's above all about people that actually like are in our supply chain. So let's start, with farmers. So we source directly from 500,000 farmers, either coffee, cocoa, or fresh milk. So these are farmers that we have a direct relationship with, but overall we source from 6 million farmers worldwide. So again, we source like different raw materials. In addition to the ones I mentioned, we also like source palm oil, sugar, fish, and seafoods. So this is really like where the risks are the most salient, I would say, for us, like in the upstream supply chain, where we source our ingredients. This is where you would actually like find issues around child labor, forced labor, living income, but they are part of our value chain. So we need to look at them and assess the risks and find a way to address them. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But this piece, this farmer piece, the agricultural supply chain is for us essential as Nestlé, as a food and beverage company. Then comes the suppliers that we have a direct relationship with, so that we have a contract with, so the direct suppliers. And some of them are very big. One that is very famous in Thailand is Thai Union, for example. But overall, we have like 150,000 suppliers, like globally. So again, this is quite significant. And most of them, that's important, most of them are small and medium enterprises. So our basically ability to also raise awareness of these suppliers on the UNGPs and train them and develop their capacities is very important. So we do that through our responsible sourcing standard, but also through tailored training, and we really try to build capacities of our suppliers on this, because we are very dependent on their capacity to themselves implement the UNGPs and trace their supply chain. So that's very important. Communities very important as well, and they really like span across, from upstream supply chain, like rural communities to communities around our own factories. Overall, we have around 370 factories in 81 countries. We have 7 factories in Thailand itself, with 3,000 people. Globally, it's a bit more than 270,000 employees that we have. And we really take care of these people. I mean, they are really like at the core of our human rights due diligence. So I said before that the risks are mainly in the upstream supply chain, which is true, but it doesn't actually prevent us from also like training our own employees, developing their capacities, making sure that they understand what human rights mean for them, for the company, and how they can contribute. And of course, we also like face human rights issues in our own operations. When it comes to health and safety or working time or other issues related to freedom of association. So this is also something that is in scope of our human rights due diligence. And finally, consumers. We sell 1 billion products every day as a company, so our exposure to consumers is quite significant. And of course, we do have an impact on consumers, hopefully as much as possible positive, but we also need to look at issues related to privacy or the right to foods, and the composition of our products, for example, is also something that is in scope of our human rights due diligence program. And of course, it doesn't come, it's not that, we started this way, right? We started actually, and this is why, we keep saying that, like human rights due diligence is a journey. And I know there is a bit of like a debate at the global level, can we talk about the journey? But for us, it is a journey, because you need to start small to then expand on your experience. You cannot, if you get started on human rights due diligence, you cannot just like address everything that I've just addressed now, from farmers to consumers. You need to start somewhere. For us, it started in 2008 with the Danish Institute for Human Rights. We did a review of our policies and standards that we had at the time, and really I compared these ones, with international standards and identified the gaps. And that was really like a very useful exercise actually for us to understand, okay, but what is it that we talk about when we talk about human rights? So we have this policy, so we have a human rights policy, we have a human resources policy, we have a safety policy, we have a privacy policy. Are they good enough actually to meet human rights expectations, or are there gaps? And that was very helpful for us to demystify human rights and better understand what they are. In 2009, we started carrying out human rights impact assessments, again, together with the Danish Institute for Human Rights. We started in Colombia and Nigeria. These human rights impact assessments that really like took us on the ground and really like interview rights holders and stakeholders and really like understand what is our exposure to human rights have been really like central to what we have done in the last 10 years. I would argue this is the only way for a company to truly understand what human rights mean on the ground, what kind of like human rights you are exposed to, and what are also the concerns of the rights holders, from employees to farmers to consumers, basically the ones that I've gone through before. So for us, like a very important part of our due diligence program. I won't actually cover like everything that I have on this slide. I will share the slides with you because I don't have too much time. But one thing I would like to mention here is in 2011, we also started our human rights training. And it's very important actually to train your employees, because it's the only way for them to understand, to make sure that they understand what human rights are. And not only what are their rights as employees, but also what are their roles and responsibilities when it comes, for example, to managing people or to interacting with, let's say, consumers or customers or suppliers. And this is really an important piece to build capacities within a company. So this is what we started back in 2011. And finally, maybe I'll pick up the 2015 date where, actually, because that relates to Thailand, where we actually commissioned Verite, an NGO and consulting company, to do an assessment of the risks that we face in the Thai fish and seafood sector. I wanted to mention this one. It's by far not the only assessment that we carried out with Verite or with other organizations, but this one relates most directly with Thailand. And really, I mean, what this work has helped us to do is really like to trace the fish and seafood supply chain. And I really wanted to emphasize this element because traceability is very important when it comes to upstream supply chains. Most of the companies right now don't have a high level of traceability. So, like whatever sector you operate in, traceability, like knowing exactly where your raw materials come from, is very difficult. This project that we started with Verite in 2015 really like helped us improve our level of traceability, thanks to the collaboration and the great work that we have done with the Thai government as well. From so the traceability level went from 15% back in 2015 to 99% today. So this is absolutely like phenomenal. So like our ability to know actually where our fish and seafood comes from, and actually track and monitor the vessels that basically procure us with fish and seafood, is very important as part of our due diligence program. I'll leave it there. I just want to share like a few achievements that we have done, and then in the next session I will talk about some of the challenges we have faced. But like in the last 10 years, we have mainstreamed human rights into 22 of our policies. So you know, like a lot of organizations keep talking about like a company having a human rights policy, and yes, of course, this is important. What is even more important is to make sure that people that are in your company understand what that means. And so one way to actually do it is really like to mainstream human rights into like operational policies. So when you have like a safety policy, and make sure that people understand what that means, also like from a human rights perspective, and the same for the marketing policy and so forth. So really like trying to make human rights as practical as possible. We have trained all our employees worldwide. Again, this is important to make sure that everybody understands what we do. We carried out 13 human rights impact assessments in so-called high-risk countries. Also, like integrated human rights into our risk management system. I think Rachel was quite clear on this. It's important. The way that you assess risks can also work for human rights with some caveats. Of course, you need to be careful with the notion of salience, but this is a great way to get started and also like socialize human rights risks within your company. And finally, as I said, like transparently reported on what we do as part of our annual sustainability reports, but also like as part of standalone reports focusing on different challenges we face, from cocoa in West Africa to hazelnuts in Turkey to coffee-related issues in Brazil and so forth. So I'll leave it there, and I'll take it back for the next session to drive you actually through our new human rights framework and what it means for us.
Thank you, Khun Yan. That was very, very comprehensive and many good key messages. You know, like no silver bullet, of course, and the need to integrate human rights into the overall sustainability and business practice, right? Not just a standalone issue. So let me turn to Khun Nusara. So can you tell us about Unilever's experience in the HRDD process, please? Khun Nusara.
So it's in Unilever business strategy, which we call a Unilever Compass, to build a more equitable and inclusive society founded on human rights. So for us, it's not a choice; it's a must to grow in the future. It is a future for growth. For us, sustainability is one key pillar of the future for growth. Hence, we drive that with a lot of activities with the aim to raise the living standards across the value chain. Like Jan mentioned earlier, it's very, very important to look at the whole chain end to end, because we make the impact. Secondly, we want to create opportunities through inclusivities. All those minorities and LGBTQI, women-owned business, we are spending more and more budget in order to develop them and help them with future skills. Last but not least, we are preparing people for the future of work, because you know we are living in the VUCA world. We are moving to digitization. How could we make sure that the people in the far up countries are equipped for this future of work, e-commerce and everything? We want to embrace it all, not only in the supply chain, but also in the customers aspect as well. So again, this is all respect to the human rights. How did we start then? If I can spend a few minutes on this. We endorsed the UN guiding principles, just simply as that. So we endorsed the principle on business and human rights embedded throughout our own operations first. as part of business strategy, as I mentioned to you earlier. And also, we also support the OECD guidelines as a practical oversight of the due diligence process. They also contain clear example of best practice that offer governments, companies, or NGOs as a common language. Because of this, our parties know what they are talking about together, and there is less confusion about terms and concepts. That will be the recommendation from Unilever experience. So again, it's not only from our own operation, but what about our partners? Unilever in Thailand, we're working with more than 3,000 suppliers. Globally, if you multiply the numbers, we are talking more than 65,000 suppliers globally. So we have the responsible sourcing policy, which address the human rights strongly in the policy. We ensure that we explain to which demands a supplier needs to comply in order to have the business with us, like treating workers with respect and dignity, and work has to be conducted with a voluntary basis. We also give tips in publication on how to continuously improve and move from meeting mandatory and reaching good and best practice. So again, in a nutshell, it is in our business strategy, so it's a must, not a choice. We're setting our strategy in 3 phases, and we have completed the first 2 phases already. The first one is setting our social sustainability ambition and make it publicly. Secondly, building capacity and public reporting. We have finished that one already, and we are now today, as of today, we are moving to the next phase, the last phase. What we are talking about, moving from do no harm to do good. What we mean by that? 3 things. The first thing, we want to ensure that everyone who directly provide goods and service to the company earns a living wage by year 2030 worldwide. Secondly, we want to spend 2 billion euros annually to the suppliers that own and managed by people from underrepresented group by year 2025. And we call it a diverse suppliers program. In Thailand, we proudly launched the program together with UNDP and the backup of SMP and OSMAP by recruiting the SMEs who owned by the diverse people like women-owned, LGBTQI, minorities, and disability, in order to offer the opportunity for them to become Unilever suppliers. Last but not least, by year 2030, we want to pioneer new employment model, and also we want to equip 10 million young people, our youth, our future, with essential skills to prepare them for the job opportunities. And this is what we have done so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Khun Nusrat. And moving on to Khun Supawadi. So Mars Pet Care, your experience, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first of all start off to say that Mars really believes in strengthened regulation HRDD to create the change that we want to see in terms of that rights are respected throughout their supply chain. And we all each have a role to play in it. National governments have to put in place strong labor laws aligned with international standards, as well as companies like Mars have to, our role and responsibility is to identify risks and respond to those risks in our supply chain and take action against them. Maybe a bit about what we're doing at Mars itself. We're taking, first of all, I think what's important is we have to lead by example. We are taking action in our own operations to make sure that we have a responsible workplace that starts at home first. And we're making sure that there is proper due diligence with our direct suppliers, that we have direct contacts with, and as well as extending it to our extended supply chains down to the farmer level, down to the fisherman level. That's very critical. As part of an overarching framework, we do have a sustainable intergeneration plan, which is like our master blueprint. And we put in at least an initial $1 billion USD to start that it's a combination of connecting different projects together to address people, planet, and well-being. And as part of this plan, we want to be able to touch and impact 1 million lives of 1 million people in our supply chains. So this is something that I think is what we are aiming our ambition to achieve. But particularly for our human rights due diligence, we do have a program called the Next Generation Supplier Program. And one critical shift is we used to have social compliance mainly through audits, basically bringing in a third party to audits. But we realized that this was more of a short-term issue, that we're shifting away from one-off short-term audits to a more longer sustained improvements. So now the focus of the program is more in terms of creating partnerships with our suppliers directly, so they bring in longer-term sustained changes in their management systems rather than a one-off time check. So this is more of a longer-term engagement process that we want to do in the longer term. Particularly, let me touch a little bit an example of the fish supply chain, because that's where my current responsibility is. Particularly for the fish supply chain, we do have in place already a second phase of the human rights action plan that essentially goes into putting in programs to work with our direct tier 1 suppliers, mainly seafood processing, to coach, partner, build their capacity on how to put in place human rights due diligence programs and address those in their longer term sustained policies, as well as moving down the supply chain in the fishermen's, for the fishers. We're going in and identifying what the problems are, test what works, and then try to bring that up to scale to make sure that workers in this supply chain their needs are being addressed. And as part of this process, we, of course, have to work with government, civil society, like-minded players here in the room with us to make sure that change really does happen. One critical thing to say that we are sourcing, like I'm similar to the companies here, we're sourcing like thousands of raw materials, but what's important, we take a risk-based approach in that we don't do responsibility across all supply chain, but rather we pick human rights due diligence in where the risk happens, right? For us, we find like fish is a priority because of the human rights risks that we have seen here for the past few years. For us, we also source issues like chocolate for our confectionery. There's issues of like child labor in cocoa plantations or palm oil, for instance. These are kind of the priorities. So we have prioritization of where human rights due diligence should be a priority. Just one last thing is also, we do started out with our supplier code of conduct that we have been constantly evolved over the years, that we expect our supplier to uphold as part of like their partnership with Mars. I want to say in particularly that of concern to us and issue that we want to be pushing for and advocating through other like-minded companies in the Consumer Goods Forum is to push for responsible recruitment in our supply chains. And it's important that we want to be able to say that there's an employer pays all principle and to ensure that workers in our supply chain are not required to pay for a job to work for us. I'll leave my intervention there. I know we are limited on time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kun Samawati. So let me move quickly to our second round of question. So now, how would you? I think some of you already touched on this earlier, but how would you motivate and advise Thai companies, especially smaller companies, SMEs, to get started on the HRDD process? Now, I really appreciate Kun Rachel's comment on earlier on focusing on the objective of the HRDD, right, and not just make human rights or HRDD a process that's just like checking the box exercise. So what are some of the challenges and lessons learned when you work with SMEs or suppliers who may not be, maybe large Thai company, but how would you get them, going? And how would you recommend where to find resources and support? So I will start with Kun Nusra first and go to Kun Supawadi, then Kun Yan. Kun Nusra, chen kap.
So I think there are key 5 recommendations from Unilever point of view. The first one is set the target, ambition and commitment. And this has to come up from all the management of the company, because it's a holistic view. It's part of the business strategy of your business. And again, for Unilever, it's not a choice, but it's a must. It's a license to operate in order for you to grow in the coming future. Secondly, once you set the target, please start comparing your current process, existing policy and process with the guideline. Pick the guideline and assess yourself against it. Maybe the gap is not that far. Surprisingly, maybe it's not that hard work that you have to do. Third, set priorities. Like you guys mentioned earlier, we cannot play it all. So you set priorities and ambition. Where is the hot topics? Where is the hot spots? And tackle on those hot spots. The fourth one is, again, is cross-functional work. It's not HR topics. Human rights, again, is not HR topics. It's it's a business strategy. Ensure that you involve every senior management and also as much as possible of your colleagues in order to make things done. Last but not least, the world is keep on changing. We learned it already ourselves on the COVID movement and everything. Things keep changing. So it is very important to have the clear policy framework and guidelines and effective so that this due diligence can be relied on. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, ครับ คุณนุสรา ครับ So next คุณสุภาวดี ครับ your recommendations.
Thank you. Very similar to what Nusra already said, but just to echo that, I think it starts with, I guess you start small for SME. I think based on my experience recently, Coach, working with a supplier who basically perhaps had a lower social compliance score, is basically start small in terms of like understanding what human rights is about. I think that starts with understanding the basic principles. We do have a supplier code of conduct, and what we do advise our suppliers at least understand what are the forced labor indicators. Maybe start with putting in place a human rights policy based on the UN guiding principles, right? And in terms of that policies level, you need to put in some key parameters that as what human rights due diligence exists. For Mars, we've simply put it for 3 simple steps, right? Monitor, assess, know what's going on in your supply chain. That's important, right? Know what's happening. Second is once you find it, you have to address them. You cannot just sit on the problem and say there's problems around and turn a blind eye to it. So it's about monitor, addressing it. And the third part is let's work together and put longer term actions to prevent it from happening. When these are the critical areas that we are supporting and advising our suppliers to follow that area. And then just to make sure that one thing I said already is prioritization is very key. Focus on areas where the highest risks are. Not to say that you should ignore the rest, but let's start small and to build up from there. And maybe the last point to build up is communications is key. One thing that I learned is that we need to learn how to communicate like internally and externally, especially communicating internally why it makes business sense for us to put an HRDD in the company. It's not just about because you have global buyers like Mars telling you need to do the right thing, but it makes business sense and it actually enables you to do more increased productivity, you're more efficient, and it's a long-term benefit that leads to increased profits in the long term. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, ครับ คุณสุภาวดี ครับ And finally, for the second round, turning to คุณยาน คุณยาน please.
Thank you. Well, first, I agree with everything that was said before. I'm a big fan of on-the-ground experience. So really like seeing it by yourself. And I think this is very important. So by going through our history, I was trying actually to show that there are different like entry points, right? So you can either start, with a gap analysis or with a policy commitment or with some training or with a desktop risk assessment or with an on-the-ground impact assessment. I think for me, what matters is for companies to understand exactly what that means because if you don't understand what that means, it's going to be like very difficult for you to convince your colleagues or your management actually to go into this journey. And so we like have a clear sense of like, okay, so this is our business. This is what we do. This is how we operate. This is where we operate. These are the types of risks or salient issues that we are exposed to. I think this is very important. And I would add to that collective action. And by this, I mean, I said before that, we have a very close relationship with our tier 1 suppliers, of course, but also with our farmers. And basically the risks that they are exposed to are ours as well. So, there is no actually like silo in the supply chain. It's not that, this is their risk, so they will manage, and, like we are in Switzerland and we don't care. It just doesn't exist. So really like running some due diligence projects, either by doing like an assessment together with other companies or together with suppliers, but also really like trying to find solutions together, I think helps demystify human rights and better understand what they are and how it is possible to address them, either like in the short term or in the long term. But I think the work that we have done in Thailand, including with Mars, by the way, and with Smirker and with Thai Union, I think is quite telling in terms of like all of us learning together and really like trying to move the needle in a sector that was actually quite complex to navigate. Because of, for example, lack of transparency, lack of traceability. And I think like all of us, we have made, like each of us and all of us together have made really like tremendous progress. But again, this is really like doing by learning. So it's not that, we followed like a specific guideline and then, like follow the very specific bullet points that you can find the guideline. I mean, you need to go to interact with the vessel owners, with the government, with the NGOs, with the workers themselves, with your competitors, with your suppliers, to really like try to find the best solution. And again, it does take time, but it's very rewarding in terms of lessons learned and how you can scale them up going forward. So I'll leave it. Like learning from this experience is the most important elements of any due diligence approach or program.
Thank you, Kun Yan. Very clear. So we were running late earlier, but I think we made good time. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left. So I have extra questions for all three of you, but slightly different actually. Let me turn to Kun Nusra from Unilever. As Unilever have both the food and non-food sides of the business, right? And food and other FMCG, consumer goods. So in your HRDD process or in your human rights framework, do you find similar or different challenges for the food and the non-food sector? Kun Nusra krab.
It's a very good question because our business is so dynamic, right? We have home care and beauty and personal care business. And another pillar is food and refreshment, including ice cream. Though from policy standpoint of view is applied to all. It doesn't separate it by business units, but it's applied to all. However, in order to achieve that, of course, I think with the food business, where there contains a lot of small stakeholders in the supply chain, it makes us to put more efforts to make things happen. But again, since we made the commitment, as I mentioned earlier, as a global level, as Unilever globally along the entire chain. So we will focus more the resource in order to once we do the risk assessment. So we will put more resource and effort to ensure that in food supply chain we make things happen. Yeah.
Thank you, Kun Nusra. Actually, we have one more question from the Q&A box. I think this can go to any one of you three. If a staff member or a worker within the company experience human rights violation, is there a system in place, like a grievance mechanism, to report and how do companies address such complaints? So maybe like a short 30-second to 1 minute response to from all three of you. Anyone like to go first?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can hear Jan, please.
No, I just wanted to say, so yes, I guess, we all have our own grievance mechanisms. Our system is called Speak Up. So it's an anonymous system. So any employee can actually like raise complaint when issues are faced or like violations in case of violations. But my point here is that really the objective of a human rights due diligence system is to avoid actually these complaints, not in the sense that like employees shouldn't feel confident actually to raise concerns, but actually to prevent proactively address, like issues that could impact workers. And I think this is really important because yes, grievance mechanisms are important and they are an important piece of a human rights due diligence program. But again, the idea here is actually like, how can you actually have the right training, policies, behaviors that prevent actually like having negative impacts on people and employees in particular.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Maybe just to build a little bit similarly to Nestle, we do have an internal process to work in our own staff has met undue justice, of course, and all in terms of particular for our suppliers. Let's say we do get a call from an NGO partner that basically there's a violence happening in our supply chain. There is a response protocol that we put in place. And of course, we also need to take the first step in terms of understanding the extent of the problem. Of course, that's the first step that we need to do. And I think because of our strategy shift is not to say, like, okay, there's a violation in our supply chain, we really cut off the supply chain, but actually to work with our supplier to make sure what is the problem and to address it. I think that's the key critical part that we're shifting towards, because I think it's impossible to say that there's never going to be human rights risks in our supply chain. But I think it starts with acknowledging there's a problem and addressing it to make sure that it can be prevented in the future. Yes.
I think I should move on to the second question, which is pretty good. For actors seeking to support or scaling human rights due diligence process across the supply chain, what resources do you think would be useful for your suppliers or SMEs to enhance their human rights performance? For example, translating guidelines, right, by shift to local languages or other such tools, etc. So anyone would like to take that question? คุณพิงค์รับไปก่อนไงครับคุณสวัสดีครับ
Sure. Sure. Basically, just you being part of this panel discussion is already a step forward, right? I think there's already a number of resources out there through the UN Global Compact, the Ministry of Justice, and also Ministry of Labor is already providing a lot of resources. And I think what's important, what's said here, it resonates, is we need to come together, whether through associations, like-minded companies, to try to address the problem. Because like what Jan said, there's no magic bullet. And we're here to learn together. I think it starts with a recognition that there's issues that we need to tackle. And then coming together like this is a starting point to getting to where human rights due diligence in place. But in terms of the wealth of resources, guidelines, you have OECD guidelines, you have the NAP, there's a wealth of resources that you can tap out, but it just takes maybe starting with capacity building, learning what it means first. I think that's the first step.
Thank you, Cap. Any other of Kun Nusra or Kun Yan would like to address that as well? Resources, support.
Like Kun Supravati mentioned, let's start with the guideline, and also there is NGOs and government sectors are there in order to support. And on top of that, if you guys are the SMEs a part of our value chain, supply chain, we can publicly share, at least from the Unilever point of view, our resource, our responsible sourcing policy that you can easily adopt. What could it mean for you in human rights policy that could help as well. So I think it's good to start and also address what is the resource needed. And then there's many areas that we want to try to help. But it's first to specify first.
Just one point I would like to add is, yes, of course, like there are many guidance documents out there. So really, I mean, we are not short of like guiding documents, which is great. And this is very needed. But I think what is like even more important than guidance documents is actually like translating these guidance documents like into like a language that your colleagues and your top management can understand. Because we should keep in mind that usually the human rights language is not a language that is spoken within companies, right? It's a complicated language. Some of the concepts are actually difficult to understand. And I think our role as people in charge of like human rights or sustainability within the company is to translate these either like guiding principles or guidance documents into a language that everybody is comfortable with. And this is important because otherwise you actually run the risk of like giving the impression that, well, this is not for us, this comes from outside the company, we don't even like understand what that means. So translating this, as you know, we have translating services for this event today, right, between Thai and English. That's the same thing, right? Translating human rights into like a language, a business language that can be understood within the company. That's very important for me. This is one of the main lessons learned from the last 10 years.
Yeah, Khun Yan, and I think we have one more question. We have one time for one more. So what key challenges have you encountered when you work with your suppliers? How to make them better able to comply to your code of conduct, especially on human rights? What have you found? What kind of technique work well as an incentive or motivation for your suppliers?
Yeah, I can take that one. Maybe just to highlight what a key challenge we have is oftentimes, we're faced with it. We're here today because we want to be compliant to an international standard set by the UN guiding principles. And I think what we're facing sometimes is national laws are not yet aligned with international standards. And oftentimes, as an American company, we have an obligation to be putting in place human rights due diligence throughout our supply chain. And we respect that, of course, the minimum standards to work with compliance to domestic laws. But as a multinational company, also have an obligation to go beyond what's required domestically. And of course, something that we face as a challenging is like we would like to, of course, see alignment with international standards, more increased regulation. And that's always a challenge when we have to put our suppliers in difficult situations that goes beyond national jurisdiction laws, right? And as part of the technique, we also do have to, the shift that we've done is it's not like we would just kind of say, you have to do it, enforce it. But I think the approach is, let's work together along this journey. This is not an easy journey. And us as a global company, we're here to support you to do the right thing. I think that's what's important, right? We're not leaving you hanging and throwing you into the water and then treading upon. I think we're taking you along the journey. But I think it's the fact that we're still going to continue business operations, and we're here to support you, to help you do the best practices. That's what's required. I think that's simply put as that. Thank you.
Khun Sawadi. Yes.
Yeah, for me, I think apart from what Khun Sawadi mentioned already, let's face the reality. By make things happen, it has some financial impacts. It costs us more in the supply chain. So how do we convince people along the supply chain, either suppliers or anyone, that we should invest more resource and finance and of course financial budget as well in this rather and how to compensate that, because we have to be competitive in order to competing in the business world as well. Hence, for Unilever, it's very clear, and again, it's easy for Unilever because again, it's business strategy, so we must comply to it, and then we have to find productivity, efficiency in any other areas in order to ensure that we have the power and ability to ensure that the human rights is there. But then the convincing and the discussion with the suppliers, how to come to a shift mindset into this, is something that I think is quite hard work to do from my experience.
Thank you, Khun Nuttara. And we have one, I think it should be our final question, which is quite interesting. We have an anonymous question saying that HRDD can be viewed as a tool for promoting companies, right? And that there's a risk of companies saying one thing and doing another. So what's your comment on this? For my take personally, I think the key is transparency, right? Of course, any company can say that they're doing good things, whereas when actually doing something else, right? But the key is transparency and pressure from their supply chain, their customers, their stakeholders. I think that might be a way to address that criticism. But I would be interested to hear maybe just 1 minute each of you before we close off our session. What kind of a response would you have to someone who said, "Oh, you're doing HRDD just to promote yourself," or just like I said, mentioned earlier, just checking in the box, right, to comply with your buyer, and that's it. Whereas that's not actually improving the conditions on the ground. So how would you address that? any of you to do entry first ครับคุณทวดีไหมครับ
Okay, sure. I can give it a try. So basically, yes, I think that's something that we also face as a business, right? What is our impact on the ground? And I think, yes, certainly it starts with communicating both internally and externally. I think, of course, we would like to just say that, you know, we're doing all these great things, but I think what's important and what we have to know is we have to constantly reach out to these stakeholders in our own supply chain. I think that's where the impact and it's not just about, okay, we have 1,000 programs in place, but I think for us, it's basically, we want to make sure we monitor closely and to make sure that people really in our supply chain are really benefiting from programs we do. And I think this is something that our management has stressed. One clear example that we have done is, you know, our support that we've done to fishermen workers has, they've received compensation for the grievances that through a program that Mars had put in place. This alone, simple stories like that, impact on the ground has showcased that we have made some impact, maybe small, but at least it has improved someone's life. And that's what all it matters, right? To us, simply put. Thank you.
ครับคุณสวัสดีครับ
Yeah, for Unilever, quick one. We make public commitment and we have auditors against it. So in terms of make things happen, there is a very clear process on make that. However, again, why do we have it as a business strategy? Because we are in consumer business. We strongly believe that if we give back to the society, the consumer will buy our products as well. Yeah, so it's we are living in the same circular economy, and this is the way how we encourage how we help improve the whole chain together end to end. So for us, again, if I may say again and again, is not a choice, it's a must, and it's not only for sustainability, but it's also the gaining economic benefit for us as well in the coming future. Thank you.
Good, Jan, any closing words on this?
Very quickly, I agree that transparency is key. And as I said before, it's not only like about reporting on progress and achievements and success, but also reporting on challenges. And I invite the person who asked the question actually to look at some of the reports we released on child labor or forced labor, where we actually like talk about the cases and the challenges that we face. It does actually, I think, take courage for a company to report on these, but it's rewarding because we should not give the impression that doing human rights due diligence is easy. It's not. It's difficult. It does take time. And it does require also like some, I would say like fundamental decisions in the way you do business. So I think we are moving away from, you know, like this area where companies were making big commitments and we're not reporting on what they do. Now it's about reporting and reporting in a meaningful way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for very, very thoughtful comments and responses. And I think we come up to the end of our session here today. So thank you again to Kun Sawadi, Kun Jan, and Kun Nusra. It's been a pleasure talking to the three of you. And thank you to our audience for your attention and very lively questions. So signing off for session 2 and handing over to session 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
ขอบพระคุณครับ
ค่ะขอบพระคุณนะคะคุณภูมินะคะแล้วก็ท่านวิทยากรในเซสชันนี้ทุกท่านค่ะก็จบไปแล้วนะคะในส่วนของช่วงที่2ค่ะสำหรับช่วงถัดไปนะคะช่วงที่3ค่ะจะเป็นการเสวนาในหัวข้อประสบการณ์ของยุโรปเกี่ยวกับการตรวจสอบสิทธิมนุษยชนอย่างรอบด้านค่ะซึ่งวันนี้นะคะก็ได้รับเกียรติจากคุณจิตรวิภาเบญจศิลป์ค่ะ
Delivered by will be moderated by คุณจิตรวิภาเบญจศิลป์ Directors of Social Division Department of International Organizations Ministry of Foreign Affairs คุณจิตรวิภาเบญจศิลป์ The floor is yours
Well, I would like to welcome all of you to session 3, Europe's experience with human rights due diligence. We're going to have total 50 minutes until 4 p.m. today. And the objective of this session, we listened to session 2, business experience, and now we're turning to public sector experience, and we learning from the experience from European countries. And as of you know that momentum for HRDD has increased significantly over the past few years, and various EU member states have issued or are in the process of issuing laws requiring companies to conduct human rights and or environmental due diligence in their supply chains. And meanwhile, the European Commission is also scheduled to propose a draft directive to ensure that companies undertake better management on sustainability related matters related to value chains and also social human rights, climate change, and environment. So we will explore in this session what do these upcoming or existing due diligence laws and regulations mean to Thai companies that have business relationship with European countries or are in the part of European companies' supply chain, and how Thai companies can remain competitive amidst the growing demand for responsible business practices. I would start by introducing the panelists, and we're pleased to have with us today first Mr. Petros Sumelis. He's the head of Economic and Trade Section, European Union Delegation to Thailand, also covering Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. He has served in many positions at the DG Trade and DG External Relations and Commercial Policy of the European Commission, dealing with issues ranging from market access, services and investment, dispute settlement, and trade barriers regulations. The second panelist, Ms. Melis Souk. She is Secretary General of the French OECD National Contact Point for RBC, and also the Advisor for Responsible Business Conduct of France, Ministry of Economy of France. She's also the expert on the French due vigilance law adopted in 2017. She has a wide range of experience as serving as the national contact point, which is also a platform for dialogue for stakeholders to resolve the RBC and also business and human rights conflict. And our third panelist, Mr. Wolfgang Binsal. He is the head of Division Business and Human Rights in German Foreign Service. And he used to serve as the head of Division of Humanitarian Assistance and also positions at the German embassies in Kiev, in Moscow, and in Cairo. Our session will have three parts. First part, we would discuss about the background legislation landscape in Europe. And the second part will be dealing with implications for Thailand. And that would come, the third part would be on Q&A, and participants can also submit their questions via the chat box, and then we'll read it out to panelists to address those questions. So without further ado, we start with the first part on the background and legislation landscape in Europe. And may I start first with Mr. Petros. The questions that we'd like to ask include we ask you to kindly explain the rationale behind the EU's move towards corporate due diligence directive, and how does legislation on due diligence fit into a bigger picture of the EU trade policy, and what progress has been made in drafting of the directive so far. What are the remaining steps in the process that remain? If you can kindly share with us. Mr. Petros, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. I hope you can see me and hear me. Thank you very much, Kun Jitvipa, for this session and for the invitation to the delegation to take part of it.
เข้ามาในช่วงนี้ผมมีความยินดีเป็นอย่างยิ่ง
So I will address the three questions that you have asked to me. On the first one regarding the rationale behind the EU's move towards the corporate due diligence directive, I would like to highlight two aspects. First, to recall that this move should not be seen in isolation, but as part of a trend that has emerged, I would say, at least 20 years ago, and that is developing since. So we have started with non-binding instruments based on a voluntary basis, and this as early as 2001 with a green paper, and we then had a more horizontal and general communication on corporate social responsibility in 2011, and then a non-financial reporting directive. So from this, then we moved to more thematic approaches, and a good example of that is the 2010 timber regulation that the European Union has adopted. And finally, we came to sectoral and binding approaches, and I think a good illustration of that is the directive that were adopted on conflict minerals in 2017. Now, this move on the part of the European Union also took place in parallel with action that our member states took, and I'm sure my colleagues from France and Germany will give you more information on that. And the European Union, of course, intervened also to ensure consistency where necessary on these different issues. So the directive, which is under preparation on due diligence, reflects the current stage of this trend under the broader theme, which we call Sustainable Corporate Governance Initiative. And in parallel to that, we also envisage to prepare a revision of the non-financial reporting directive under the theme Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So this is the context. Now, what is exactly the rationale behind all of that? So we think that companies' responsibility in the social, human rights, and environmental area is an issue that has gradually come to the forefront of the political debate in Europe. There clearly is a political demand and an expectation on the part of our citizens, of European consumers, of the civil society, of the European Parliament, and of our member states. And we, as EU institutions, we are responding to this demand. And as the demand gets stronger and more specific, we are also adjusting our instruments, and they are becoming both more elaborated in a sense, but also, as I indicated, they sort of change their nature and becoming binding instead of voluntary. And also the scope of the instruments is getting enlarged, and in particular, again, if I take the example of the conflict minerals regulation, we see here an instrument which now also captures the supply chains and the supply chains at the different levels, tiers. Final point on the rationale, I think it's important also to be conscious of the fact that responsible business conduct and due diligence are even more relevant in the context of the green and digital transitions, which are the big priorities of the European Union for the years to come, and also in the post-pandemic recovery. Now, moving to your second question on how such legislation fits into the bigger picture of the EU's trade policy, I think first we need to again recall that the EU trade policy nowadays plays a broader role than just delivering on market liberalization and tariff reduction. It also brings its contribution to the implementation of the EU policies in other priority areas. And of course, sustainability is a prime example in this respect. So in a sense, the EU trade policy, if you like, has to take into account the external dimension of the EU's internal market. We have adopted recently, in February, a new trade policy strategy at the EU level. And I think its title is very, very illustrative of the discussion that we're having today. It's called Open, Sustainable and Assertive Trade Policy. And this new trade policy strategy marks a reinforced focus on sustainability. Now, how do we take into account sustainability in our trade policy and in our trade agreements? Here again, the rationale, the big idea is that international trade should be conducted in a manner that reinforces rather than weakens sustainability. And the main instruments that we are using in our trade policy through our trade agreements regarding sustainability is the inclusion of strong trade and sustainable development chapters in our agreements, where we recall the international commitments that the parties are taking under relevant agreements, where we commit, where the parties commit to ratify all the conventions in this respect, and in particular the core ILO conventions, where we commit to implement all those international commitments domestically, to not lower the level of protection in order to have a trade advantage. And on top of it, the trade and sustainable development chapters offer a very useful platform for discussion and interaction, both between the authorities, but also with the inclusion of civil society organizations. And due diligence issues are more and more present in these provisions of the trade and sustainable development chapters that we are developing. Now, when it comes to this specific directive that we are talking about today, although it is an autonomous legislative tool of the European Union, this due diligence proposal will be based, of course, on all the relevant international rules and norms that exist, and be fully compatible with the EU trade policy. I think your final question was about the progress in the drafting of this directive. So there I would say that well, the legislative proposal is being finalized by the European Commission. We had, as for all our legislative proposals, conducted the preparatory work, in particular an impact assessment that was done both through a stakeholder consultation and through an external study that we commissioned and which was published in February 2020. It's interesting to note that this study shows that the voluntary action, which was privileged so far, except for some sectors, has not brought about the necessary behavioral change on the part of all the companies. So based on this impact assessment, we also had intensive inter-service consultations within the European Commission in designing and in drafting our proposal. These were intensive because obviously a tool like this one, which is cross-sectoral and which aims at imposing certain obligations in terms of due diligence, does relate to the work of several departments of the European Commission, and therefore we need, of course, to discuss with the colleagues from different departments to come to common views. So now we are, as I said, at the finalization of this proposal. Further to any necessary adjustments and fine-tunings that may appear necessary, the next step should be the adoption by the European Commission. There is some delay compared to the initial timeline that we had in mind. So currently we foresee the adoption in the first quarter of 2022. What matters, of course, in such an important issue is to get it right in such an important area, and therefore slight delay we think is a price worth paying. Now, this is only the Commission's proposal. Once it is adopted, it will be subject to what we call the ordinary legislative procedure with our co-legislators, which are the European Parliament and the Council. So it will, of course, then take some time before this ordinary legislative procedure is concluded and the directive is adopted. And once the directive is adopted, a directive is a legislative instrument of the European Union which does not impose direct obligations on the companies. It has to be transposed by each member state into its national legal order in order to have a legal force. And usually when we adopt a directive, we give some time to our member states in order to transpose the directive. So it's difficult, if you like, at this point in time to give a precise indication on when exactly it will enter into force. But what I want to explain to you are the different steps that will need to be taken before it becomes applicable for our stakeholders and for the companies.
Right.
So I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Petros. I think, well, your point that you mentioned that whether the instrument be voluntary or binding and the dynamic in the society that have led to change is quite interesting, and it would be good lesson learned for many other countries as well. And now we move to the experience of France and Germany. Your questions include what are the key expectations and elements in the French and German due diligence laws? What does the government prepare private companies for the legislation? And for companies, particularly with the complex and deep supply chains, we understand it will be more complicated. How do they ensure due diligence? And for the case of France, with implementation experience, how the implementation process have been going so far with the benefits and challenges, if you can share your experience. I would start first with Ms. Melis Souk. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for inviting France and myself to participate to this very interesting 5th dialogue on business and human rights in Thailand. You ask a lot of questions, and I don't know if I have enough time to respond them all. Maybe first to remind that the French duty of vigilance law was adopted in March 2017 after a quite long-lasting parliamentary process of 4 years that began just after Rana Plaza accident in Bangladesh in 2013. With the adoption of the law, France was the very first front-runner countries to have a mandatory due diligence law in the world. And it was in a country where we have already a very strong policy framework for CSR and responsible business conduct. So now what are the key expectations of the law? I would say 2. Never again a catastrophe like Rana Plaza. And the second is to make human rights and the environmental key dimensions of impact linked to corporate activities and to contribute therefore to SDGs and sustainable development. We have also to bear in mind that the law comes on the top of soft law tools that we apply in France, namely the OECD guidelines for multinational companies and UNGPs and ILO core conventions that do apply to all companies. Now, the French duty of vigilance law, what it is concretely about. The law targets very large multinational companies seated in France. The aim at the time of adoption was to cover companies with large activities worldwide through their subsidiaries they have in the world and also through their supply chains. The law fixes 2 thresholds to determine submitted companies. The MNE with at least 5,000 employees in France or MNEs with at least 10,000 employees globally. The law requires these large MNEs to develop and to publish a vigilance plan, or we can also say a diligence plan. That plan will enable the company to identify risk, prevent and mitigate severe incidences to human rights, health and safety, and the environment caused by activities of these multinational companies or through their supply chains. The law mentions key 5 components of the plan, notably the risk mapping, the supplier monitoring, an alert mechanism, and it requires to follow up the implementation of the plan. The law foresees, very importantly, that the control of the implementation of the law will be done by the judge. There is an access to justice provided by the law for complainants to bring a case to the judge, for example, in case of absence of a vigilance plan of a company, or in case of an incident that would be caused by the inadequacy or the absence of the vigilance plan. Currently, we have 4 cases brought to court in France for alleged facts in Uganda, Chile, Mexico, and Brazil. All cases are about human rights due diligence and also linked to environment for some of these court cases. You ask also how the government prepare private companies for that legislation. I would say that we had, as I said already, the regulatory framework for RBC was very strong in France, and we adopted the NAP on business and human rights in 2017, so that the long-lasting parliamentary process to prepare the law gave time to companies to anticipate expected changes, so that companies themselves prepare the changes to come through many private sector organizations. Now, the French National Contact Point had been very instrumental to raise awareness about the content of due diligence to help companies to accommodate coming changes. The NCP handled several cases about due diligence and human rights of many French companies, and it also did a lot of promotional events since 2014, parallel to the parliamentary works. It was important to engage also with the OECD to keep on elaborating guidances on due diligence in sectors like the garment sector, but also the general due diligence guidance of the OECD that the NCP is promoting to companies as a very useful tool to give the companies ideas on how to tailor the due vigilance plan or the vigilance measures. You ask me also how companies do to manage the supply chains, the very complex supply chain. So it's there that the things are complex. The law asks big MNEs to take care about entities in their supply chain with they have an established commercial relation. So it's the scope of the law. And to do that, we see a very new and strong trend of MNEs, that is to join collaborative initiatives to mutualize their supply chain assessment and following audits of their suppliers. We see that, as said in the previous panel that gave a lot of very practical examples, very relevant ones, we see that MNEs are mapping their supply chains and they connect that map with the human rights the human rights risk assessment to identify and mitigate risk. We also highlight a very important new trend also highlighted in the previous panel, that is transparency. We see an increased transparency by MNEs through the annual report, but also with the International Trade Center through the tool sustainability map that is making publicity about supply chains of MNEs. We also know that audit is a tool, a very important tool to assess suppliers and subsidiaries, but it's not the only one. For example, we see large French MNEs engaging with the ILO and engaging with external stakeholders to better understand risk. And as external stakeholders, I would like to highlight the role of trade unions and also international trade unions, the role of NGOs that can give many information about country risk or sector risk. We have also engagement with governments, engagement with national contact points also, and with researchers. So it's an engagement with the external world of the company to better cope with the challenges. And last, you asked me about the implementation. What can we say as a kind of stock taking? Too long to discuss in few words. But clearly, the law is a paradigm shift, a strong shift in the private sector to really look at the risk and the consequences caused by business activities on workers, on the planet, on people, and less risk caused to the company. So it's the paradigm that we are shifting the way we look at risk. And this shift is also coming from the increase of sustainable finance, global warming, fighting climate change, and the mobilization to fight inequalities that have increased because of the COVID-19 pandemic, as was highlighted by Honorable EU delegation. So many challenges remain to be addressed, but things are moving, the ball is moving. And we see the key challenge for now is the level playing field. And this is why France is very supportive to see the European Union developing in the coming months the legislation on mandatory due diligence that would cover human rights and the environment. And we also support strongly policy coherence with sustainable finance, the Green Deal, and issues linked to trade and social and environmental dimension in trade. And finally, we'd like to say also that the role of international and multinational organizations is very important to support companies, to support governments, to achieve the changes that due diligence is requiring. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you for comprehensively address all of our questions. Although I asked a lot of questions, my colleague asked me to monitor the time too. So I would move to Mr. Wolfgang Binsai. We now listen from German experience. Mr. Wolfgang, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting to this fifth national dialogue. We are very well aware that Thailand is a front runner in implementation of UN guiding principles and is the first Asian country to implement a national action plan. And I've also taken note with great interest of the fact that listed Thai companies will have to report on ESG commitments, including human rights, in the future. So it's a particular pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak here. Germany has adopted a mandatory Human Rights Due Diligence Act in June this year, which will come into force for larger companies with more than 3,000 employees on the 1st of January 2023, and for companies with more than 1,000 employees in 2024. So overall, this will be about 4,800 companies that are covered. The law is a consequence of our national action plan on business and human rights that dates back to 2016. It was a little bit similar to what my French colleague said. We had also this impact of the Rana Plaza catastrophe that gave birth to a broad discussion in German society and the impression that we had to do something. So this national action plan was established, and this was based on the UNGPs. So with 5 core expectations regarding companies in Germany. First, a human rights policy statement. Secondly, procedures for the identification of actual or potential risks on human rights. Third, measures to counter adverse impacts and review the effectiveness of measures. And fourth, reporting on that. And fifth, a grievance mechanism. Now, Germany crucially decided to carry through a thorough monitoring process on the effectiveness of the national action plan and these expectations, and to see whether voluntary measures are sufficient for this implementation. So we had a monitoring process that was carried through for companies with more than 500 employees between the years 2018, 19, 20. And according to clearly established methodology that was agreed within the government beforehand. So the result was then very clearly that voluntary measures alone were not sufficient to have industry implement the provisions of the National Action Plan. And actually the result was that less than 20% of companies surveyed had done so. So then in July 2020, the government decided to adopt a law. We had another internal debate in Germany that lasted another year, and in June 2021, finally the law was adopted. And I may say this result of the monitoring process that I mentioned, as was quoted by my EU colleagues, Mr. Somelis, this was very typical. This was not a particularly German result, but other studies like on the EU level found the same proportion actually. And there was a Finnish study with the same result also. Now, the law does not apply directly to the suppliers in the value chain outside of Germany, but of course it has effects on the suppliers through the obligations imposed on the German companies. And so German companies will need to conduct the due diligence measures in their supply chain, and the instruments I think that were mentioned by Mrs. Suk will most probably be very similar for German companies for obvious reasons. So they will have to go for audits, they will have to have a dialogue with the supplying companies and have some capacity building probably, and yeah, see of course a grievance mechanism, which is a very central element as well. The German law is not sector bound. It is not restricted to particular industries, or also not to so-called high-risk contexts or something. It is a general law. And as a mandatory element of the National Action Plan now, the German Due Diligence Act is close to the UN guiding principles. Of course, not 100% implementation, but the core elements of the UNGPs are reflected in the law. So, for example, again, a regular risk assessment must be conducted at least once a year. And also if there are important changes, for example, if you have a new product or a new production facility, then a new risk assessment is due. Policy statements concerning its respect of human rights and stating and explaining the due diligence obligations and activities of the companies. Third, the company will have to take preventive measures in order to mitigate the assessed risk along the value chain and provide remedies if human rights are violated. Fourth, companies are required to set up a grievance mechanism, I mentioned before. And fifth, companies have to report publicly on their human rights due diligence at least once a year. Measures apply per se for the own company and for the first supplier, and suppliers farther up the value chain are included into the prevention mechanism in the case the company gains substantiated knowledge of human rights risks in the value chain. The reference points of the law are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and of Economic and Social Rights, and crucially, of course, the ILO core labor standards, and then a few environmental conventions as well. Of course, central then is the prohibition of child labor, of forced labor, discrimination at the workplace, and the freedom of association. It means also that health risks or health norms have to be respected at the workplace, and the prohibition of health affecting pollution. Now, how is it implemented? In Germany, we will establish a new Department Foreign Authorities that will monitor the implementation. The Federal Office for Economic Affairs and Export Control is this authorities. It will verify the company's published reports and call for improvements in this event of shortcomings. It will have powers of investigation within a company, and will also able to apply sanctions if obligations are not met. sanctions are up to 800,000 euro for natural persons and up to 8 million euro for companies, and big companies can be sanctions up to 2% of their turnover. So these are quite stinging sanctions. Also, companies may be excluded from participating in public procurement processes. Now, of course, the idea of the law is not to push companies to retreat from business contexts. A termination of supply chain cooperation is only a last means of resort in cases of protracted, very severe human rights violations beyond a company's sphere of influence. With our Due Diligence Act, we have now preceded, like the French colleagues, the EU legislation proposal that has been announced for this year, actually, and now is announced for next year. Of course, business side in the debate on the law in Germany has often argued that we should wait for a European regulation in order to allow for a level playing field within the EU. Now, the last German government considered the need for a binding regulation as too urgent as to wait for the quite long period. As Mr. Somelis has explained, this will take certainly quite a while until it is adopted everywhere. But we do wait, of course, very eagerly for the EU proposal now, and the coalition agreement of the parties that have just formed the new German government have underlined their support for such a regulation. And I'm convinced that this will also be a game changer again in the process, well beyond the borders of the European Union, actually. Perhaps just two last points to make. How is the way forward? I think there is one thing that has been mentioned before, that we have a tendency to move to more mandatory due diligence regulations. The reason is because we have seen that voluntary measures alone are not sufficient, and so we have a law in Norway now. We have a law, upcoming decision for a law in the Netherlands, and of course the EU will plough the field for further mandatory due diligence worldwide, I think. And the other aspect is that there is a tendency to broaden the aspects of the human rights due diligence to environmental and climate elements as well. Because the climate issue is so urgent worldwide, and because also in the understanding of the customers, of the people, they do want to have clean products, and the markets are also moving into that direction, including the financial markets and so on. So, and the OECD is also looking at reviewing their recommendations, their guidelines, and include or strengthen the environmental and climate elements. And the working group on business and human rights in Geneva of the UN, in their way forward of the UNGPs, have also seen this link to environmental questions. So this is perhaps just a last remark, and thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wolfgang Binsal. And I think, well, the two important points mentioned by both Mr. Wolfgang and Ms. Melis is about level playing field and also the shared studies and capacity building among EU member states and the European Commission. So that's something that's quite important in the process as well, considering that these regulations and laws would have implications and direct impact on business in different countries. And now, because our session is quite substantive. There are a lot of details and questions asked, so we managed to get 10 more minutes for our session, and we move to part 2 of our session. And I think participants are following on these implications for Thailand. And questions for the EU would be, what do effective human rights due diligence process look like? And what are your suggestions to the EU trading partners and how they can prepare for the upcoming directive? Mr. Petros, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for this second round of questions. I mean, I will not elaborate a lot on the first question, because I think this was already well covered also in session 2, where you had really practical examples given by specific companies on how they undertake their human rights due diligence processes. But I mean, and obviously we cannot speculate on the details of what would be included in the EU proposal. But I think the main points I think have been made, that this is a process that has to be conducted by the companies in order to identify the risks and in order to put in place the procedures on how to avoid them and how to mitigate them. I think there are certain, of course, big principles that will have to be applied in terms of using international standards in order to perform such due diligence, in order to have a reporting system in place, and in terms of transparency, which is, of course, particularly important. I was saying earlier that there is a strong demand from the consumers, the civil society on imposing such due diligence obligations on the companies, and therefore transparency is also there to show what is being done. Now, usually legislation in this area also, or at least tools that come in parallel to the adoption of legislation, also provide business with guidance on how they can conduct their due diligence. I mean, again, if I take the example of EU legislation, the conflict minerals regulation comes with certain guidance and with also the main principles on how to establish certain certification schemes that can sort of facilitate the implementation of the legislation by business. The European Commission last July published a guidance on forced labor due diligence to give, again, practical examples and guidance to companies on how to conduct it. I mean, this was also a preparatory step in view of the submission of our proposal. Now, on your second question regarding suggestions to trading partners on how to prepare for such legislation, I mean, first allow me to refer to the statements by the European Union ambassador at the opening session earlier this afternoon. I mean, you heard from Ambassador Daly that this is the due diligence in human rights and social issues is an upward global trend. It is an inevitable way forward, and it is there to stay. So the awareness and the preparation on the part of both the authorities and the operators, we think is particularly important. Now, as I have said, and as my colleagues also have said from our member states, EU legislation or member state legislation is based and will continue being based on international norms and standards that originate in the UN, the OECD, the ILO. And since this legislation will be not only about human rights and social rights, but also about environmental aspects. Obviously, relevant international norms do also include the relevant multilateral environmental agreements and the Paris Agreement. And why are they based on international norms and standards? Essentially because here we are addressing an issue which is global by its very nature, given the integration of the value chains in today's globalized economy. And the more our trading partners commit to this set of international rules and standards and implement them, the easier it will be for them and their operators to conduct due diligence with regard to operations taking place on their territory. So I think the responsibility in preparing, if you like, Thailand for the introduction of such legislation lies both with the authorities and with the business operators themselves. Obviously, a country that has introduced in its legal order these international norms and standards by having ratified all the necessary conventions will find it easier to comply with the EU legislation when it will be adopted. And in this respect, again, allow me to refer to the speech by the EU ambassador earlier today, who in particular recalled the importance of the ratification of the missing ILO conventions on the part of Thailand, Convention 87 and 98.
Great.
So I think I will finish there. I mean, perhaps just to final point, we have also certain programs, certain projects, and in particular the responsible supply chains in Asia program, which is a very useful, we think, project to raise awareness also of the business operators. So we are conducting a number of actions under this program with active participation on the part of Thai stakeholders, and we are committed to continuing that since it will be even more relevant in the context of the adoption of our legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And now we turn to France and Germany. From your country's experience, existing due diligence law, how does this law affect the foreign companies and especially the Thai companies? And what should Thai companies prepare themselves? How should they prepare themselves? And what are the support and resources available from the government to help the company that seek to comply with these laws and regulations? Ms. Malis Souk, please.
Thank you, Chair. The French duty of vigilance law applies to foreign companies in two ways. The first case is if this foreign company is a subsidiary or if it is controlled by the MNE that is submitted to the law. In this case, the foreign company may be asked by the French headquarters to report on its own due diligence to what risk links to its own activity, for example, on the workers' right or environmental and human rights impact assessment and its supply chain. The second case is that the law may apply indirectly to a foreign company if this one is a supplier or of a French multinational company submitted to the law. It's what we also call the cascade effect. And here, the buyer, the French MNE, the buyer, may request information to the supplier about social aspects like working conditions, health and safety, freedom of associations, and the management of environmental risk. Many companies also use the code of conduct and audit to monitor the suppliers. Traceability will be very important to share information with the branch based in Paris. Now, how should Thai companies prepare themselves for these key changes? It's a very important question, and I will see three areas. One is awareness raising and training, capacity building that will be very valuable assets for Thai companies to better cope with business and human rights standards like the OECD guidelines and of course ILO conventions, as it was highlighted by my colleague from the EU delegation. The second way to prepare is to to building up collective approaches in Thailand. For example, we have in France several business organizations dedicated to corporate social responsibility. We have the Enterprises for Human Rights, the Observatory for Social Corporate Responsibility. We have the Group of Directors for Sustainable Development, and also very interesting, a working group on human rights set by the French network of Global Compact. And in these business organizations, the companies, they can share experience, learn together, and improve their due diligence system and discuss CSR more broadly. The third area is to build up sector approach as another tool. The sector level is very important. For example, in France, we have the Luxury and Fashion Strategic Framework that set up a working group in CSR that is working, for example, on traceability and circular economies that are linked also with RBC topics. And in terms of resources, as I said, the French law didn't put in place resources like we heard from Germany, as it gives the control of the law to the judge. But the NCP is here to make access to information on due diligence, all the guidances developed by the OECD. It is also a grievance mechanism to address issues and conflict in global supply chain and in the activities of French subsidiaries abroad. So we still see that as a government, it's very important we keep on participating to OECD, EU, ILO, UN works on further guidance and tools, and of course, to support the fair level playing field on business and human rights and RBC.
Great, thank you. And now we turn to German experience. What do you say about the implications for Thailand and Thai companies? Mr. Wolfgang?
Yeah, thank you. It's a little bit difficult to speak about experience because the law is not yet in force. It will start in 2023. Of course, we are preparing, or companies are starting to prepare themselves. And I think that what my French colleague said applies very similarly to the German situation. There is this cascade effect that German companies will have a dialogue with their suppliers in Thailand and help them. There is a common interest, of course, of the German customer and the Thai supplier to implement these norms. So they will find ways how to prepare themselves together for this law, and capacity building will certainly be one of the elements. And then the sector associations or business associations, like also the German Chamber of Commerce, will stand ready to support these companies in the Thai context. I'm convinced. Now, I would also like to support what Mr. Petros said regarding the support from the government of the country of the supplier to implement, or to first to ratify all the international conventions that are the basis for all these due diligence obligations. But what is equally important is, of course, the implementation then, because the main problem most oftenly is not in the formal sector, actually, when companies have suppliers and they already have their standards, their quality standards, but also their due diligence standards for human rights. But the problem is often occurs farther up the value chain when the suppliers of the suppliers and their suppliers are involved, and they, in certain contexts, in some countries at least, reach out very far into the informal sector, and this sector is not it's very difficult to be controlled, of course, by the European customer. So the main support a country can, the government, the authorities of the supplier can provide is, of course, to control the informal sector or to reduce the informal sector. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And I think you mentioned also important point about the formal and informal sectors and how small and medium business enterprise and people involved in the supply chain need to be aware and comply also with all these regulations. Now we're turning to Q&A and from chat box. I think we don't have questions posed via chat box, and then maybe we move to the concluding remarks, and we ask the three panelists to shortly give their 1 minute takeaway message, which will be food for thought and what we take away from this session. Let me start with Mr. Petros, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. No, I mean, I think the conclusion for me is that again, the awareness is extremely important in this area, and hence I think these type of events, of course, are extremely useful. And the other thing that struck me is also that I mean, the three speakers, we were both all from the EU and its member states. We have not consulted before speaking, and yet we came, I think, with very consistent messages on the part of two major economies of the EU and the European institutions. And I think that shows how strong the support within the EU is to this sort of due diligence obligations. And also I think the recommendations that we all gave to Thailand, its business operators, its authorities, were also very consistent. And I think really I would strongly encourage also both the authorities and the operators to think along these lines, because it is a reality that will arrive. We don't know when. It may be in 2 years' time, it may be later, but at some point it will arrive, because the expectation is there. The expectation is there from the marketplace, and Thailand, of course, is essentially an exporting country. So it is natural that it has to take into account of what's happening with its principal clients overseas. And from that perspective, I think it's really important that there is a better awareness. And as I said, we are ready, of course, to contribute on our side to increase this awareness so that there are no surprises, and that the economic activities can continue in a smooth manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ms. Melis, what would be your takeaway message?
Thank you. I would like to echo what my colleague, Mr. Soumelis from EU delegation just said, and add 2-3 things. One is that you all understand due diligence and CSR, it's complex. It impacts many policies, many sectors. It goes beyond corporate law. So we support the use of a smart mix of measures in Thailand and also in other countries, combining mandatory measures and voluntary measures, building up international conventions, and using also the multi-stakeholder dialogue to accommodate future structural changes. The second proposition, it's to maybe invite your country to think, why not, at joining the family of the OECD guidelines for multinational companies, and why not reflecting on a kind of mandatory due diligence regulation in your country. And finally, as time is short, I will be very happy to keep on the dialogue in the future months to support Thailand moving on that path. Thank you very much for this kind invitation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for mentioning dialogue and way forward. Now I move to Mr. Wolfgang. What would be your message for us to take away from this session?
Thank you very much for giving me the last word. I can only underline that I do believe that this issue is going to grow in importance. Governments don't want to have forced labor, child labor in their supply chains. People electing governments don't want to have it, and customers don't want to have it. So the shift to more stringent laws is going to happen in the future. And for this, we need perhaps also in our customer countries, say, support for business. That's what we are doing with a help desk, for example, with advice to companies that are interested to implement the UN guiding principles and other norms. And this can also translate then to support in the supplying chain or in the supplying countries and supplying companies. Yeah, and therefore I also can underline that we need dialogue in different fora. This can be bilateral dialogue. This can be a business dialogue, of course, between associations, between companies, but also in international fora to increase and to improve the norms, the international standards on business and human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all three panelists, Mr. Petros, Ms. Melis, and Mr. Wolfgang. I believe it's been a substantive and meaningful session, and it's good that it laid out the way forward for future dialogue and cooperation that we can learn and share what we have in terms of experience and lesson learned. I would like to end session 3 here and hand over to the MC, Kun Chiraporn. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
ค่ะก็ต้องขอบพระคุณนะคะคุณจิตวิภาแล้วก็ท่านวิทยากรทุกท่านในเซสชันนี้นะคะ
คุณจิตวิภา as well as our resource person and expert. Before we go to the next session, could you please scan the QR code or click the link for the survey in the chat box? If you scan or click at the link, you will be directed to the surveys for interactive survey. And I would like to ask you to scan the QR code and participate in this interactive survey with us. Thank you so much. If you cannot scan the QR code, the link to this interactive survey is available in the chat box. So that will be questions. First question is the company ready more or less in terms of the human rights due diligence process? We have been listening for 3 sessions. How ready is your companies in terms of implementing the human rights due diligence? And we have rating from 1 to 5, 1 not so ready, and 5 ready. And that company feel that you can implement it in the next day or 2 or tomorrow. We have more people filling out the survey, so I will give you some time to answer the first question.
ตอนนี้ก็เรทเราอยู่ที่ระยะประมาณสัก3กลางๆเนาะ4ใกล้แล้วใกล้จะพร้อมแล้วน่าจะมี
Rate 3, 4 is almost ready, and 5
ยังสามารถกดเข้ามาได้นะคะ
mostly ready for implementing human rights due diligence.
มาเรื่อยๆแล้วนะคะ เดี๋ยวจะขอเปิดโอกาสให้ทุกท่านนะคะได้ร่วม
Let's
กันร่วมกิจกรรมกัน
all of us fill out the survey for a while.
ค่ะก็เอาเป็นว่าคร่าวๆแล้วกันเนอะไม่มีผู้แทนจากบริษัทใดเลยที่คิดว่าวันนี้เรายังไม่พร้อมส่วนใหญ่ก็คือ
No business representative think that they are not ready. Usually, after hearing about HRDD, human rights due diligence, they feel that they are somewhat ready or already to operate, and this is a useful process for the business, the national economy, as well as the well-being of the people in the countries. I think that most companies would think that they are ready. So let's take the second question for the survey.
ท่านต้องการคำสนับสนุนในเรื่องใดบ้างเกี่ยวกับการดำเนินกระบวนการ Human Rights Due Diligence ภายในองค์กรนะคะอันนี้คิดว่า
What kind of resources or support needed for implementing human rights due diligence in your organization? Within what kind of support you need from like the co-hosts in this event? For example, like financial resources, resource persons, etc. You can just like type in words to training, self-assessment, training and human resources, knowledge base, HRDD training.
ค่ะเริ่มมาแล้วนะคะส่วนใหญ่ก็จะอยากให้เทรนเนาะอยากให้มีเครื่องมืออาจจะเป็น guidance นะคะสร้างความตระหนักรู้ให้กับ
guidance, awareness raising for their staff.
ค่ะก็จะมีในเรื่องคู่มือการฝึกอบรมให้เป็นในทิศทางเดียวกันอันนี้ก็น่าจะดีนะคะ
Standard training manuals.
โอเคอยากให้อาจจะมีการมันผลการประเมินเนาะจะได้เห็นว่ามันอะไรยังเป็นแกปอยู่
Identifying gaps.
ตัวชี้วัดโอเค
Indicators.
ค่ะอันนี้ก็ทราบความเห็นคร่าวๆของท่าน
Thank you so much for your input.
ทั้งบุคลากรที่มีประสบการณ์ในที่นี้คือหมายถึงว่าผู้ที่อาจจะ
One expert resource person, maybe some people who can guide or coach or mentor you, as well as train your workforce, as well as guidance manuals.
โอเคหลักๆก็น่าจะประมาณนี้นะคะทีนี้จากความเห็นของทุกท่านเนี่ยเราก็เลยมาถึงช่วงสุดท้ายของงานในวันนี้แล้วก็คือจะเป็นในเรื่องบทสรุปแล้วก็แนวทางการปฏิบัติทีนี้เราก็จะได้รับข้อมูลนะคะจากท่านวิทยากรนะคะ2ท่านด้วยกันที่จะมาไกด์ว่าแนวทางต่อไป
Finally, our last session we will discuss the way forward for like HRDD assessment in Thailand, conclusion and way forward on human rights due diligence in Thailand. We are honored to have two resource persons, Mr. Benjamin Michel and Dr. Seri Notasud. Mr. Benjamin Michel is a policy analyst from Center for Responsible Business Conduct (OECD), and Dr. Seri Notasud, member of the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and former Asia Thailand representative. Let's start from Mr. Michel.
Hi everyone, my name is Benjamin Michel. I work at the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct. We're in the context of a dedicated project on responsible supply chain in Asia, implemented with the ILO and funded by the EU. We've been actively promoting responsible business conduct and risk-based due diligence in 6 Asian countries, including Thailand, for the past 4 years. So first, I would like to thank the organizers for having me today and for giving me the opportunity to reflect on all the work that Thailand has made to promote human rights due diligence and responsible business conduct. As some of you may know already, but the OECD is home to the most comprehensive government-backed instrument on responsible business conduct, that is the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprise, and the associated due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct. If I'm here today, it's also because our standards and those of the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, or the ILO Tripartite Declaration, are mutually supportive and aligned in their expectation on businesses. Indeed, when the OECD updated the M&E guidelines in 2011, we ensured alignment between the Human Rights Charter and the UN Guiding Principle, as well as a common understanding of what constitutes due diligence. The concept is at the core of responsible business conduct. It's that companies should seek to maximize their positive impact, for example, through contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, but they also have to minimize their harms to the planet and society. And like all the speakers here today, we strongly believe that human rights due diligence is the most efficient process for companies to make sure that they effectively do no harm. So what's due diligence for the OECD? Due diligence is a process by which companies can identify, prevent, and mitigate actual or potential adverse impact in their own operations, but also throughout their supply chains and in their business relationships. At the OECD, and for example, through the Responsible Supply Chain in Asia program, we worked with government, businesses, civil society to make sure that the concept of due diligence is widespread and adequately implemented. The OECD standards set out what companies are expected to do, but also help them do it through detailed guidance and tools. This is also because human rights due diligence is different from companies' traditional risk management and compliance approaches that we're here today to also explain what's due diligence. So due diligence is risk-based, but it's not focused on risk to the company, but on risk that the company cause, contribute to, or are linked to for others and the planet. It is a process that is focused on effectiveness and on what has worked and what has not, and how to address the impact of the companies. It's also a continuous and ongoing process that involves stakeholders, including workers, but also civil society organizations, shareholders, and others that might have an interest on the impact of the companies. Lastly, it is a difference in that companies are expected to engage in processes to provide remedy for the impact on those that have been affected by the adverse impact of the company, even in cases where there have not been directly a direct impact from the company. So further, the COVID crisis, I think, has underlined the need for urgent action on responsible business conduct and on human rights due diligence. We saw that both the pandemic exposed both the vulnerabilities and strengths of global value chains, and their disruption were particularly severe for workers and society here in Southeast Asia. The interdependencies of our production networks put the spotlight. The interdependencies of our production networks put a spotlight on the risk of ripple effects when global value chains are disrupted. Local disruptions in Thailand can have a global impact all over the world. So that's where I think due diligence can be useful tool to map your supply chain. But in light of the impact of COVID-19, the ASEAN and its member states were swift and reactive in applying and embedding responsible business conduct in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework to build back better and to foster resilient supply chains in the region. And what about Thailand? What is the way forward for Thailand? Over the course of the work that we've been doing in Southeast Asia, we saw Thailand becoming a regional leader in responsible business conduct. Notably, and this is part of where we are here today, is Thailand became the first country in Asia to adopt a standalone national action plan on business and human rights in 2019. But also, I think responsible business conduct and human rights due diligence is of particular importance for green growth and green investment, considering Thailand's vision of transitioning its economy, especially through the bio, circular, and green economy model that Thailand is promoting. Responsible business conduct related activities in Thailand have been undertaken by the private sector and civil society as well. We've seen a lot of conferences and actors put it this the topic of human rights respect by companies forward in a lot of different places. And we at the OECD have been working quite closely with the government and other stakeholders through the EU-funded Responsible Supply Chain in Asia program, and also through the OECD Thailand country program to make sure that RBC is at the forefront of the Thai government agenda. The efforts over the last few years to set policy direction by the Thai government are commendable and amazing. But the real test will be in the implementation. That's why, for example, the OECD provided key recommendation when it published its 2021 investment policy review of Thailand. First, we highlighted that Thailand should and could make RBC a wide practice across its economy. Second, we also been looking at how the government can use its own leverage to promote more sustainable business practices. So when it comes to making responsible business conduct widespread, there is a few policy options for the government. First, support, enable, and promote human rights due diligence across different business sectors, including in the different provinces. The government can also provide and communicate clear expectations to businesses on what are responsible business conduct standards and what is human rights due diligence. That's exactly what the goal of its meeting and dialogue today is. We also encourage and support implementation of responsible business conduct in the financial sector. This includes promoting responsible business conduct due diligence in the operation of large institutional investors, such as the Social Security Fund, for example, which could follow the lead of the Thai government pension fund, which is one of the first pension funds in the world to adopt the OECD mini guidelines in its risk management process. Make RBC due diligence a standard in operating also in special economic zones, in promoting transparency around selection of projects, establishing operation of zones, as well as meaningful stakeholder engagement with affected communities in project development. When it comes to using the government leverage to promote RBC, the Thai government is a strong economic actor. So first, it can promote due diligence in its procurement activities. It could be also considering revising the Public Procurement and Supplies Management Act of 2017 to include RBC expectations. And second, the government can also promote due diligence in the activities of state-owned enterprises who are predominant actors in the Thai economy. Finally, and looking forward, I think Thailand has put a big emphasis on green growth and green investment. Thailand had made great strides in developing comprehensive and consistency policy framework for green growth and environment, in promoting also green investment. The bio, circular, and green, or a BCG economy model in Thailand 4.0 put green growth related concept at the heart of its development. Green growth is also reflected in Thailand development strategies and consistent climate mitigation target. Thailand policy framework for environmental protection is also strong and has been strengthened in the recent years. Finally, in the energy sector, Thailand is clearly a regional success story in promoting private investment for renewable energy and has used public finance strategically to mobilize commercial financing for green investments. So I'd like to conclude by quoting the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, which says that a return to business as usual is no longer an option for ASEAN in the post-pandemic world. As paradigm shifts will be required of ASEAN government, businesses, and civil society to work collectively to enable systemic change needed by the region for a sustainable and resilient future. I think this quote sends a clear and very strong signal that the region is ready to embark on the next level of implementation of responsible business conduct, and the OECD stands ready to support its member states, including Thailand, in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michel. หลังจากที่เราได้ฟังคุณมิเชลกันไปแล้วนะคะลำดับต่อไปนะคะก็ขออนุญาตเรียนเชิญค่ะ
Hearing from คุณ Michel, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Seri Nonthasut. Dr. Seri, the floor is yours. Can you hear me properly? Yes.
นะครับไม่ทราบว่าเป็นอะไรอาทิตย์นี้เขา
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't know like why I am the last person to deliver the conclusion for the past week, and this is not the conclusion. I probably like open an avenue of discussion or this platform for the discussion. My analysis would beg to differ from others speaker because I have limited time. I'm going to cover 5 points, and that may be different from other people or other stakeholders. In terms of like HRDD, human rights due diligence, what are the key issues? And second, the megatrend for HRDD and how to make like HRDD become compulsory. Trend toward like making HRDD mandatory, disclosure and reporting. And the fourth issue, I beg to differ from all of the resource person and speaker for today. Thailand is not only the first country that have developed the national action plan on business and human rights. Thailand is the first country in ASEAN that also have like mandatory reporting requirement, which can also like make HRDD process as indirect mandatory process in Thailand as of next year. Regarding the HRDD, many people talk about HRDD process. I'm not going to discuss it in details, but I think the large business in Thailand have an strong awareness and accurate awareness on HRDD. Many countries also adopt many business adopt the HRDD process and reported in the annual report, with a comprehensive publication and publicization of reporting to make people become more aware to ensure like transparencies of the information in the HRDD process, especially in large business. Regarding the business case is not just the business case, it becomes the basic expectation for the business, regardless of the size, whether you are small, medium, or large business, you have to be responsible for adverse human rights impact from your business. And also in the human rights due diligence, HRDD have become an important tool for the business in order to comply with the respect for the duty for the respect of human rights. If you ignore the human rights due diligence, of course, it will result into your participation or lack of participation of the SDG Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the legal liabilities when the law is implemented. In terms of development, there are many businesses that disclose their information and reporting regarding the human rights due diligence and human rights assessment impact, but they try to transfer the responsibility from the business to the government sector or from business entity to other entities. For example, the business probably like release a lot of greenhouse gases or carbon footprint. They try to like outsource the logistics sectors from their business. It is not going to contribute to the net impact. We have to ensure the investigation into systematic transparency and reporting. HRDD have to respect human rights, especially when the national standard, national legislation standard or legal standard does not meet the or lower than international human rights standard. The HRDD or human rights due diligence is not one size fits all. Each organization have to redesign and deploy HRDD to suit your organization size and specific context. And finally, the challenges from your contractors, government agencies, and your business partner in terms of like making
ขออนุญาตพูดตรงนี้ว่าเราพูดถึง3เสาของหลักUNGP.
3 pillars of the UNGP. HRDD is one of the ecosystem, but this is not the only goal of the 3 pillar. Respect for the human rights, you probably like do not need to implement HRDD. But if you don't implement HRDD, it would be difficult to find other tools because HRDD is designed systematically for the journey toward realizing the respect for human rights, as well as effective remedy whenever violation have occurred. Second, the global trend on making HRDD mandatory. Many people have already raised these issues in Europe since 2011. The development of UN guiding principle on business and human rights. Many European countries make like HRDD and UNGP become mandatory in France, Australia, England, and the European Union is moving toward this trend. This is like easier for you to see about global trend on making HRDD mandatory. There are about 8, 9, 10 countries that impose the HRDD as mandatory measure. My argument is actually like next year, Thailand is going to be like partially an indirect mandatory approach in Thailand as well. And I will elaborate on this topic later. The United Nations Human Rights have praised the EU as like OSCHR welcome the intent to introduce a new regime for EU mandatory supply chain withdraw from it and align with UN guiding principle on business and human rights. And despite Thailand do not have this HRDD mandatory mechanism, but if you are the suppliers to this country, we will be affected to commit HRDD but through the cascading effect. The general recommendation from the International Convention on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights talk that recommended states should adopt measures such as imposing due diligence requirements to prevent abuse of convention rights in business entities, supply chain, and by subcontractor, supplier, franchisee, or other business partner. This is going to be the topic that the Committee on the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights will examine Thailand's state of progress in terms of this regard. Finally, the disclosure and reporting. Disclosure and reporting usually I have two aspects. We knows about financial materialities, and soon in the near future we are going to talk about or review environmental and social and governance or significant ESG. So we call it like environmental and social materialities, and the information have to be like material information. The materiality of this information comes from the assessment of the impact to like external stakeholder, to community, to the global environment, and to the world we live in. We used to have like the NAP that identify disclosure and reporting materialities and national goals. We picked 3 topics in the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in 2019, which is labor, environment, human rights defenders, and investment. These are the key three topics for the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. So when the business investigate this plan, they have to consider about aligning the topic on the materialities of their reporting to these 4 topics if they operate the business in Thailand. The second issue about materialities, the business usually think alleged that they contribute to sustainable development, but there are overlapping and supporting areas and intersectionality between the environmental, social, and governance and sustainability. The human rights issue is the issue relevant to the environment, governance, and social issue. So we need to take this approach holistically on these 3 topics. Internationally, the disclosure and reporting tend have different methodology. First thing is like mandatory voluntary system. The company can review the ESG reporting and result. For example, the reporting from the US in which ESG from like 95% of company makes their detailed ESG information publicly available. However, only 6% receive assurance of data from public company audit firm. So when firms actually like use voluntary publicly available of information and publication in the US, they use like voluntary, but this information have not been assured or verified. This is the different because Thailand use different approach which I will discuss in the future. When there is a question regarding SDG washing or SDG washing by like branding SDG wash or ESG washing. They claim they do, but actually like they don't. We have already discussed on this topic, but I would like to give you food for thought for this information for voluntary disclosure. The possibility for like ESG washing or SEG washing is just like making the report without any sincerity or commitment. They may do E but claim that they do S and G also in their reporting. However, in Thailand, in 2022, ESG washing for a listed companies, you would have violated the law. This is the key takeaway in Thailand. You cannot do like false or declaration or ESG washing. We have different standards, but the main framework that Thailand have used is the GRI principle. Because I have a limited time, what are the standard for GRI disclosure, and I would like to assure you that the disclosure and reporting have two main aspects. The qualitative and quantitative indicator, you have to take in mind of the materialities, the comprehensiveness, both the number and the qualities. In Thailand, the process of HRDD process of Thailand, the stock exchange of Thailand have launched the guidance on modern slavery risk for Thai businesses. This information and this guidance have been an initiative for one report in order to prevent modern slavery risk. Set Thailand work with fast and work free to implement this guidance. We examine the business value chain and also identify what risk in every step of the value chain in order to reduce the risk of modern slavery in your value chain from inbound logistics, operation, processing, outbound logistics, marketing, sales, and after-sales services. These are the steps in the business that can prone to the modern slavery risk. You have the risk by like direct action, you cause modern slavery trade, or you can contribute by using the value chain or supplier, or you can be indirectly linked through like third party. Human rights due diligence create an awareness into the risk from your action, from your contribution, or directly linked activities to third parties. So please read this report, this guidance. You can Google it. During the question and answer, you said that you want to have like some guidance. This guidance is available in Thai and in English. Next, particularly of the HRDD process in Thailand, in the next year, we are going to have like one report which cover the financial and non-financial data. ESG data is non-financial data. It's not only the disclosure, but the business is advised to have indexes. For example, in the green box, in the red box, there is a recommendation percent of supplier access, number of workers engaged, number of complaints received. This can be the indicators for like clear reporting in the one report system. For listed companies, we also have the topic and index that business are required to report. In terms of grievance mechanism, the third pillars of the UNGP. We asked people to business to review the number of complaints made and how they were received, resolved, and remedies. Numbers of complaints that were satisfied with remedies, as well as the number of complaints that the corporate have not addressed. The human rights due diligence can guide you and walk you through this report next year. And this is what the listed company have to prepare. This is the elephant in the room. You talk about the elephant in the room in Thailand. I think like Thailand, we didn't talk about the mandatory requirement which have been like identified in 2020s. It will be used in 2022. For listed company in 2022 have to disclose at least two information. For example, first, the greenhouse gas footprints. This is the first time in ASEAN that UNGP will be integrated. On the second aspect, the respect of human rights in the business operation for listed company and for IPO. These are the particularities of HRDD process. We used to have like 56-1 on financial data, and now we know it as one report, which also include both financial and non-financial data reporting for listed company in Thailand. Directors and executives shall be jointly liable for any damage arising from disclosure of information to shareholder to the public, which contain false statement or concealing material fact, which should have been stated in the following cases. The director and executive have to have an awareness that the voluntary disclosure as of next year will be mandatory disclosure. It comes with your liabilities. We use the term, you can see like material facts. The term materialities or significance of information you have to implement in your own firms. What are the material facts? And the material fact cannot be concealed. In section 281/10, you can read it on the screen. These are the important factors. And in conclusion, with the limited time, there are 4 takeaways from my presentation. First, human rights due diligence is a critical tool to assess risks of business and its value chain for human rights and mitigate the risk and disclosure risk and mitigating measure to the public. Human rights due diligence can also reduce the risk to the public. Second, human rights due diligence is a part and parcel of the process to implement and realize the respect for human rights by businesses of all sizes, not only large business anymore. Number 3, key success factor to HRDD are, which is maybe differ from other resource person, the materiality scoping through stakeholder engagement and the quality of information and reporting. This is extremely important. And the top priority, I wish I could have discussed with you earlier, and I think that we can discuss with you in detail later, but let's take it as a New Year takeaway. The top priority in 2022 for board member and top level executive of listed company in the Thai stock market is to supervise and monitor the preparation and disclosure of ESG data as mandated by the SEC. Mindful of legal liability for false statement or concealing, withholding material facts. In other words, the board member and top level executive are bound to use USDD. Now it's not like indirect anymore. It could be like direct liability. They're about to use directly HRDD as a tool to comply with the new mandatory ESG disclosure rules introduced by SDG. external auditors or audit committee, internal auditor or external auditors should be able to give assurance to the accuracy and completeness of SDG data. Unfortunately, I cannot talk about this due to the limited time. This is a takeaway for you for New Year's, and hope that you can take into the consideration of this topic, and next year you can initiate training as well as the process in order to create the awareness and prepare the new disclosure system of Thailand. Thailand is the first country in ASEAN that implement mandatory reporting and disclosure, and you have to use HRDD for monitor disclosure and monitoring of your business operation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Seri Nontasuth. HRDD is the tools in which you can use. Otherwise, the business will suffer from adverse consequences if you don't implement HRDD properly. Michelle and HRD, Dr. Seli have talked about the guidance on the modern slavery benchmarking tools in order to address the issue of forced labor. This guidance is prepared by the Stock Exchange of Thailand. We have put this link in the chat box so that you can download this information for your business use. Before the end of this session, could you please fill out the evaluation form by scanning this QR code? It will take about 1 or 2 minutes for post-meeting survey. We are going to take your feedbacks and comments to improve our activities in the future. Thank you so much, and I hope that we can organize a national dialogue to meet the need of our stakeholders. The 5th National Dialogue on Business and Human Rights due diligence will be rebroadcast and available in our YouTubes, and we will end with the Professor Dr. John Rachis, the Special Rapporteurs on multinational company and private organization. He is the founding father of business and human rights. Professor Rachis passed away in July 2021. In order to commemorate his life and contribution, we will end today with the video commemorating Professor Rachis. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank our top-level executive, our resource person, and also participants for staying with us.
Over the past 2 decades, a business and human rights movement has been growing. The architect of this movement was John Ruggie, who was central to the establishment of the United Nations Global Compact in the year 2000. The Global Compact is now the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative.
It is not only the largest corporate citizenship initiative in the world, I think even more importantly, it's by far the most geographically inclusive. And that's what makes the difference. It has a global presence and it has national networks. And it's become a movement.
John Ruggie served as UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's Special Representative for Business and Human Rights.
In 2005, when I was appointed, the business community found the whole subject of human rights a bit mysterious and even scary. It seemed to be a world without boundaries and increasingly held them responsible for things that they didn't think they had responsibility for or didn't know how to manage.
No company that I know of has ever said, we don't respect human rights. My question was, how do you know? How do you know that you respect human rights? And can you show that you do? Do you have systems in place that would allow you to back that claim? And the answer was, well, no, not really.
His signature contribution was authoring the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which were unanimously endorsed by the Human Rights Council in 2011.
The UNGPs, as they are universally known, are the first authoritative guidance issued by the United Nations Human Rights Council for business and human rights, their respective obligations to their communities, to their workers, and to consumers and others.
This was the first time that the UN human rights machinery had adopted or endorsed a normative text that governments had not negotiated by themselves.
This required that we provide businesses with the conceptual tools and practical guidance, enabling them to know and show that they respect human rights.
And so we developed something that we called human rights due diligence, whereby companies can assess the impact that they have in their supply chains with regard to workers and modify their behavior accordingly.
10 years after the launch of the Guiding Principles, the movement that John helped spark continues to gain momentum.
What has happened in the last 5 years or so, many governments have turned to this idea of human rights due diligence and turned it into national law, or in the case of the European Union, into regional law.
These developments by no means fix the global challenges of business and human rights, but they do provide a strong foundation for the UN Working Group and other entities to continue to build upon the UNGPs and to help build back a better world. Thank you.
The UN Global Compact is immensely grateful for John's tireless efforts to drive business respect for human rights and help create a world where no one is left behind.